Boy,
All right.
Airto, it's been a long time since I've seen you. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Pretty good. I heard you'd passed away, so
Jesus. Yeah.
No,
Well,
I haven't really. We haven't done one of these segments for a long time.
yeah. Well, I think we did one last week, right?
Well, that's a long time for me. I'm
Yeah.
old.
All right.
you know.
Yeah. Um,
So
well,
what's
wouldn't it be the
what?
other way around? Like once you're older, time goes by much faster, right? Like, when you're a kid, 5 minutes seems like excruciating. When somebody says like, "Oh, wait, 5 minutes," you're like, "Oh my God, this takes forever."
That's true. That's true. But
And
it
then
does
like
seem
as
to
I
go
get older, it's
faster.
like
It does
years.
go faster.
Now I can plan years in advance when before I was like I couldn't even think years in advance.
So we're not going to do any chicken stories this week, right?
I don't know. I think we might talk about Barney Miller, and there's a chicken story in there. I was kind of like, oh, that's kind of funny.
Okay, let's do it. Let's talk first about Ted Lasso
Okay.
because we talked about that last time we got together, and you had seen just the pilot, and
Yeah.
I had seen many clips and the pilot.
Hmm.
And so my reaction from the clips in the pilot was that I thought it was probably a pretty good show, but the pilot wasn't great, but it was good.
Yeah.
That's you kind of thought the pilot was just good too, also, right?
I was kind of like, it was okay. It was tepid waters. I wasn't
Yeah.
really. I didn't quite understand what the buzz was about. I didn't get it,
Yeah, and there
and I
was
was
a buzz. There's been a buzz
yeah,
for a while, and it did really
right,
well in the Emmys. It just
yeah, it
cleaned up
crushed,
on the Emmys.
yeah.
Yeah,
And I wasn't really. I thought it was interesting. Like it kind of reminded me of a Major League, where you have a boss, a club owner that doesn't like the team and wants to see him fail. And I wasn't, his persona, where it kind of struck me as like a little bit disingenuous, like goofy, kind of like ultra nice
goofy. Yeah, I
guy.
got that goofiness. I felt that
Yeah.
goofiness too.
So it kind of
So
didn't really sit with me. I would have given it a not a thumbs down, but a thumbs sideways, like a
sideways thumb.
sideways
Yeah,
thumb.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well,
but that's me. That was just the pilot.
that was just a pilot. So then you decided to watch more episodes to
Yeah,
see what you thought. So I'm curious, what happened?
fucking loved it. It's a great show.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, I really love the show. Yeah,
Wow,
I was like,
wow.
I'm on the second season right now. I was like, wow, this is a fucking great show. It's
So what
not as
saves it?
goofy, huh?
Is So what saves it? Because from the clips I've seen, there's some really poignant moments. There's some
Yeah,
really touching moments.
yeah,
Um, but I haven't seen episodes. I only
yeah,
saw the pilot. The pilot in that told me there was real potential there. You actually watched the whole first season,
yeah,
and you say the potential was actually realized.
yeah. I mean, it was actually really good. I don't want to give away too much. I'm
Well,
not gonna
just
give the
tell me
arc of the
this:
stories, but what?
would you say it's because the stories are strong?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And like you said, it's the poignant moments. Like there's a lot of heart in the show. It comes off really goofy at first, and so not that I'm opposed to goofy stuff. Like I like Mel Brooks or whatever. Like I like
Yeah.
all kinds of variety of stuff. It just didn't really like we talked about it being like being there. Where he's kind of
Yes. Uh-huh.
a little light brained. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
but
Well,
in that way,
being
it's
yeah,
more
yeah.
philosophical. This one didn't strike me that way. It just kind of hit me, and like sometimes, and I say this to people who get, this is kind of an aside, but I say this to people who get readings from people, like when they sometimes the reader's in a mood or something like that, and so they're not reading your story correctly, and it doesn't hit
Mhm.
them right. So sometimes it's like that. You watch a show, and it just wasn't, I wasn't super into it. I kind of was not really, I was gonna give it another try, but we talked about hacks, and I watched the whole season after watching the pilot.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
Well,
wasn't
that's how
really
I
determined to
feel.
watch
Yeah.
this.
I from the pilot alone, I probably wouldn't have watched anymore. But the pilot and the clips made me think that there's more to see. And now that I've talked to you, I'm going to watch the series
Yeah,
because
it's really good. I
yeah,
was like,
yeah.
fuck, man, I liked it. Like, it's got great heart, and even the characters are interesting. Ted Lasso's an interesting character. He's not as like, this affable, goofy
He was one
personality.
dimensional.
Yeah,
It seemed in the
Yeah.
pilot, but he's not one dimensional in the
Right.
series.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of cool story arcs, there's a lot of story in the and because it's for Apple TV, they have that extra 8 minutes, so they pack a lot into that extra 8 minutes overall because it's a full 30 minutes. So
Uh,
you get a full, and it's more of a dramedy than I would have thought. It's
uh,
there's not actually even a ton of like super laugh out loud moments.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's
I
kind of what we
understand
talked about
that.
before, with some of the other shows we've been watching.
It's funny because my history is in shows that did 3 laughs a page was kind
Yeah,
of a requirement,
right.
and I can't stand those kinds of comedies anymore. I
Hmm.
like the dramedies.
Yeah,
I like when there's a lot of story and drama and humor.
yeah.
And
I
I
actually
think I'm
think,
gonna.
well, yeah, I think this type of storytelling, even though we talked about that before, like with hacks, it wasn't really like laugh out loud. It was we kind of, or at least I don't want to put words in your mouth, but your impression of it was it wasn't as funny as it could be, or it wasn't a funny comedy, right?
It
So
wasn't as funny as it could be, and as even though the story, well, the pilot wasn't that strong. The story was, they try to introduce so much that sometimes the stories aren't that strong because they're
right,
introducing so much.
right,
But I feel that these dramedies could all be funnier without losing the drama.
hmm,
And this is what I think has happened. And a lot of people are going to not like that I say this, but in the old days, they used to hire funny guys,
hmm,
jokey guys,
hmm,
and we used to write a lot of jokes. And because we were better with jokes, and though I was more of a story guy, I feel that most of the people on the staff were more joke oriented,
hmm.
and so that's what we did. Well, it came to the point when they started having this expansion to all these other networks and such, where they started making more shows, or canceling the very expensive shows and going with less expensive shows, that they couldn't hire as many funny people. There are fewer funny people than there are people who can tell stories.
Hold on
Uh,
one sec. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but this thing started playing in the background.
what's that?
That was Barney Miller. It just started playing out of nowhere. Did never even touch the
Oh,
thing.
huh.
Okay, sorry. We'll cut that, cut that out.
Okay.
Yeah, that was weird. So you were saying about the yeah, that was
So
weird.
in the old days, they used to pay a lot of money for comedy writers. We got big salaries, and because it was rare, the people who can actually make people laugh out loud is a rarer skill than the people who can tell good stories. And that may sound like I'm being arrogant or prejudiced or whatever, but I think it's true. It's harder to make people laugh out loud than it is to interest them in a story.
Yeah,
Now, I don't mean one skill is maybe better than the other, because as I said, now I prefer dramedies over these really big laugh shows. But I still think the dramedies could be funnier than they are. I think they need a few more funny people on their staff who can get a laugh out loud moment. And I
hmm,
think it wouldn't hurt the dramedies if they had a few more laugh out loud moments, and they don't. And they don't
yeah,
even try anymore. They consider themselves dramedies. And so now they hire people who are good storytellers, and I'm glad they're doing that.
hmm.
But they're not hiring the guys and gals who are funny. They're not hiring funny people anymore. And so the shows are getting less and less funny and more dramatic.
Yeah. Ted Lasso actually, probably two other people. It has like some bigger comedy moments and some laugh out. I personally, it didn't strike me that way. I actually got really swept up in the character development. I mean, to
Mm-hmm.
the point of being teary-eyed, throughout most of the series. So I was just like, wow, this is fucking incredible storytelling. They
Wow.
really rope you into the depth of these people's behavior. It's a
Uh-huh.
behavior study, basically, character study, behavior study.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they really took it there. And it was like not pedantic. It was like, and it's not, like where you're going to like an armchair psychologist. You know what I mean? There were
Yeah,
just some
yeah.
really deep moments that I was
Huh.
not expecting to get out of this show. And I found it very enjoyable and just plowed right through the entire, to the point where like, my wife came in and she wanted to go do something else. And I was like, I can't watch this other, she wanted to watch Billions. And I was like, I can't watch this right now. I had to finish the season first.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's a big changed from your first impression.
Oh, for sure, 180 degrees. And
Huge.
I like
Wow.
Billions a lot, so I could be pulled away to go watch Billions for almost anything, So,
Wow.
um,
That's really well, I definitely have to see it now. I'm gonna watch the whole
yeah,
series,
I'd highly recommend
um
it.
but as I said, I still didn't I don't care if it's billed as a comedy, which these are, and they win in the comedy category, which they
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
They should hire a few more truly funny people and get a few more laugh out loud jokes. It won't take away from the story as long as you don't try and build your story around the jokes, and which you should never do anyhow. So I really think they could be funnier, and I think people are getting a little bit lazy or a little bit cheap in not wanting to go for the whole thing. And maybe when I see Ted Lasso, I'll change my mind and say, you know what?
yeah. Be
Um,
interested to see what you think.
yeah, maybe if it were funnier, it would interfere, but I don't think so. I'm not talking about going 3 laughs a page. I'm just talking about a laugh here and there that I find, like when I watch Atlanta, I think it's a very good show.
Mhm.
However, it doesn't make me laugh much, and there are some really smart, humorous moments, but there aren't very many laugh out loud moments for me.
Yeah.
Um,
You got to see the second season or the second episodes, though. I mean, the couple of episodes later, because I went ahead and watched it, there was some funny, really funny shit. Like I was
yeah.
surprised, because I know what you mean. But I was gonna say too, the I the irony of this type of storytelling, even though like some of your background is in that like primarily the joke,
Uh,
three jokes per page, is I
yeah.
really feel like this, because I've read a lot of your writing, this style of comedy really suits your writing style, your natural writing style.
I think so. I think I'm gonna really like Ted Lasso. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to watching the series now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I feel like this era of comedy writing would really, it really serves your writing style in the sense that you're good at like you have a lot of humanity in your stories, and you have a lot of you know, there's a lot, you get to depth of character quickly, which is a hard thing to do. That's one of the things I've, tried to emulate over the years, and definitely work more toward is trying, because I could do, joke, you know what I mean? And
Yeah, yeah,
have a thin
yeah.
story. That's an easy thing to do. But I
Yeah,
prefer the other style of writing, which is
I agree. We were talking a couple weeks ago about the Big Bang Theory, and
right.
though I admire the laugh out loud moments in it, I don't like this series because there's almost no story.
Right. Well, especially the
So
pilot was super thin. I mean, just
yeah,
so
yeah,
thin.
yeah.
But
So
yeah, it's like, there's probably like 3 or 4 jokes. And if you like their characterizations, then you're hitting like 5 or 6 jokes per page, just based on their mannerisms and everything. So yeah, I would check it
right,
out.
right.
Out of the all the pilots that we've watched so far,
All right, I have
um,
to watch it. I
I
also
really
want
enjoyed
to
it.
catch up. I've just been so busy lately with other things, but I would like to see, since you liked Hacks so much,
Yeah.
and again, I felt the same way about the pilot. I thought it was good,
Yeah.
but not. It didn't make me want to watch the series. But since you enjoyed the series so much, I want to catch up on that one also.
Yeah, if I had to pick between, like, if I had to pick, they both have good storytelling, right? And they have some poignant moments. I think Ted Lasso kind of wins out, like, in having some more depth, because there's more characters to focus on, and the
Uh,
way they focus on those different characters brings out more of that character depth
huh.
than Hacks.
Wow.
But Hacks is interesting, it's fun, and I think Ted Lasso is probably a little bit funnier just in terms of like what I've seen from the first season of each show,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the lead is a person who did joke. He was
Yeah.
on SNL,
Yeah.
so he's deliberately choosing to do something that's more profound, and I admire that.
Mhm.
I said I would much rather watch a dramedy, even if it doesn't have enough laughs, than one of these silly shows that get a lot of laughs, like The Big Bang Theory. To me, that's
The thing that
personally.
he does, he pulls off really well is sincerity. And so what I originally took as a goofiness, and kind of like being too affable and not having any backbone, as the stories progress, his sincerity is actually what is very attractive about, his
Yeah.
character.
Hmm.
And even though he's still goofy and it's kind of funny, um, yeah, that's what draws you in. That's where the stories really reside in that sincerity that it has. That's the base point, and it's I found it very fascinating. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great.
Somebody told me, I don't know if you've heard this year, that Ted Lasso, the first time it ever was on TV was a tiny
Yeah, it was like a
piece
sketch,
that was a sketch
like
for a
8 years ago. Yeah,
commercial or something,
yeah.
right?
That's what I think. Yeah,
Oh well, I think it was a commercial for football
yeah.
for the NFL or something.
But he was a little bit more hard edge in that. This one seems a little bit softer. You know what I mean? His character. I watched
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I started getting all kinds of like Ted Lasso stuff and like information and really digging deep. So
Wow, that's great. Well,
yeah,
that's interesting. That's amazing? It shows you too. Sometimes, especially in the old days, we used to do a pilot, and if the pilot didn't, they'd test the pilot. If the pilot didn't test through the roof, you're done. You're
yeah,
over.
yeah. That's
Now they buy whole series. Not so much the regular networks, but all these extended networks.
yeah,
They buy a series, short series, and it gives you a chance to prove what you can do.
yeah,
It's hard to give all you can do in a pilot because you have to introduce all these characters and the
yeah.
concept, and you only have half an hour.
hmm
So a lot of good shows, probably, I don't know of them offhand, but I'm sure a ton of good shows were canceled just because they only did a pilot and nobody saw the potential.
Oh, I 100% agree. And I think it's kind of does a disservice to the talent of the writers and the actors and all the other people on the cast and the crew, because you can't really, pilots are traditionally thin. They're just thin. You introduce a lot of characters, and then in the next few episodes of the season, you pull back on certain character relationships and dive in deeper on other character
Yeah.
relationships. And that's important, and that's what gets your interest and why you like certain relationships. And that we could talk a little bit about that with Barney Miller, and we did Brooklyn
Yeah, we're going to talk
Nine-Nine.
about that. But even like with Ted Lasso, say again. So
Yeah,
in the pilot, when you're establishing your characters, it's hard to get to great depth because
sure.
you haven't had enough time to develop the characters well enough. So
hmm
over the growth of the series, as the characters develop, it's just richer, and you have a richer base to draw from than
hmm
from just a pilot. Pilots are a bad idea. I think it's a terrible idea. I think people should these networks should commit to short series and then make adjustments in the series. If the first few episodes aren't working, figure out what's working or not working, but not just do a pilot and throw it out. Do a
hmm
pilot. Sometimes it doesn't even get to the air. Do a pilot, throw it out before it gets to the air, before it gets anywhere. They spend a fortune on pilots, or the networks, the regular
hmm
networks do,
hmm
the traditional networks.
Right.
Spend a fortune on pilots and pilot scripts that just get thrown out. It's just,
hmm
I'm telling you, it's a stupid industry. People don't do it in a very they kind of believe in that old thing about throw the spaghetti against the wall, see which strands stick.
hmm
It's
hmm
like they don't really analyze and work it out. And the traditional networks. So I think the traditional networks are dying, and probably for good reason.
Yeah, I mean, that analogy is funny because, you're throwing spaghetti against the wall in this scenario to see, like, if a pilot to see if the spaghetti's done. But really, what they do is they throw the entire plate of spaghetti and the meatballs to see if the meatballs stick. And it's like, well, of course the meatballs aren't going to stick. You don't, you know what I mean? That's not the way it works.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you say that because you have successfully written pilots and sold them and gotten them to
Mhm.
air. And it kind of reminds me of it depends on whose hands it's in, right? Like if you wrote the Tortellis, and then the way you envision the Tortellis, is it Tortellis, right?
Yeah, the Tortellis,
Right,
but yeah, I envisioned them one way and did the pilot that way, and the pilot got sold. I mean, enthusiastically got sold, tested through the roof.
right.
It enthusiastic because I didn't want to do this show, and they came to me and said, "You got to do this show because it's doing so well." And I
hmm
didn't do the show,
hmm
and then the person they brought to actually run the show, because I went off to do some other show, the person they brought in to run the Tortellis after all this enthusiasm didn't do it the way I did in the pilot. Chose to go back to a one-dimensional kind of character for the
hmm
lead and the secondary lead, and the thing just went right into the toilet. How does that happen? How do they buy a series based on a pilot and then choose to go another way when the pilot tested well? I just don't understand those people. I've never understood the people in network television. They just seem to be. I've worked with so many people who are really business people, and they're smart business people, but they're terrible creative people, and they made terrible decisions. I think I told you I did a series once where we hired oh shoot, what's his name? It doesn't okay. It doesn't matter his name because maybe it's better I don't use the name anyhow. But we we did a series, and the guy we hired for the lead had never been seen before.
Yeah,
Well, the
I know who you're
person
talking
who
about.
you know who I'm talking about,
Yeah.
yeah. So the person who ran the studio at the time was a business executive who had been promoted up to the top position.
Hmm.
And he decided that this person that I had in the lead after I shot the pilot was so bad that he was willing to refinance the shooting of another pilot with the same script with just a different actor in the part.
Hmm.
And then 3 years later, the same actor won an Oscar.
Yeah, and he's a fantastic actor. I think we should just say his name just so, because it doesn't really hurt him at this point. His career is pretty
Okay,
solid.
yeah, Tim Robbins.
Yeah, Tim Robbins. So that's a
But
good indicator. It's like, hey, somebody overlooked that person and said, for whatever reason, they decided this person wasn't a go for this. And it could just be the project, not everybody's a
but
go
you
for
know
every
what
project.
I'm saying? It was because it was a businessman
Yeah,
who made that decision, and he was a smart businessman. He'd
right,
done really great things for the studio. So I'm not putting him down. He was smart. He knew his job.
right.
He didn't know the job they finally gave him, which was to run the whole studio, in which he tried to make creative decisions and just had terrible judgment about that. How could he see somebody like Tim Robbins and think he's terrible when in fact what he didn't see was Tim Robbins was so good that he didn't seem to fit in with the other people who were chewing up the scenery,
Hmm.
So gosh, it was just a huge mistake. And I fought for Tim, and they threatened, they said if you fight for Tim, we're going to shut down the whole project and everybody loses their job. Either Tim
Yeah.
loses his job or everybody loses their job. 120 people are out of work, Ken, if you don't make this adjustment. So I made the adjustment. I fired Tim Robbins.
Then it puts you in a weird place, you know what I mean? Because now you're making, it's like one person's career or multiple people's career, you know what I mean? And everybody, it's such high stakes, and everybody takes everything very personally because it does feel personal. You don't always understand, like it's hard to probably imagine that, you're having conversations where you're going to bat for somebody and then you still come to them and say, hey, it didn't work out or whatever.
Yeah, Tim hates me. I mean, like he didn't take it well when I fired him, but I was trying to be very gentle and complimentary in the firing. But when you get fired, you're fired. And you think when they're telling you nice things, they're just blowing smoke up your ass. So
Yeah, and
he
it's
he didn't
difficult.
he
It's
didn't buy
difficult.
he didn't buy any of it. And it was
Yeah.
Christmas too. He was
Oh,
going home.
fuck, man.
He was going home for Christmas, having been the star of a show, and it was his first gig.
Oh, jeez.
And he goes home and he has to tell his family he's fired. And they must have thought, well, Tim, you're probably not very good. Maybe you should find something else to do. And Tim then goes on 3 years later to win an Oscar. And then I think he won another Oscar after that. Not much long.
What was the Oscar for? Bull Durham? Did he get an
No, he
Oscar for
won
that?
for
Or was it Shawshank?
no, it wasn't Shawshank. That's interesting because those were wonderful parts
Yeah.
and he played them so great. But it was for a supporting part in Mystic River or something like that. Do you
Okay.
remember that one?
Yeah.
Something like that. I can't
I
remember
don't
the
have
title.
Mystic River. I think that's the one with
Mystic
Sean Penn.
River.
I
Yeah,
can't.
but Sean
Oh, it was
Penn.
Sean
But
Penn.
Sean
That
Penn.
was later though. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
after
yeah.
Shawshank and everything. Mystic River is that one where it was like he
Well,
was
then
like
maybe I'm
abducted
not
as a kid or
I'm
something.
not yeah, I'm not remembering this right ever. All I know is that maybe it wasn't 3 years
Because he did
later,
Jacob's
but
Ladder and all that stuff way before. I'm
but
not.
once Tim was free from having to do television, he did those great movies. And
Yeah.
so and then he eventually won, I think at least one Oscar. I know he won one. I think he might have won multiple Oscars, but
I mean, he crushed it in all those films we just talked about. He's super
and in
talented.
everything. I've never seen
Yeah.
him bad in anything he's ever done. He did a couple that weren't such great films, and he was still fabulous in those films. So
Yeah.
I probably am the only guy in the business who ever fired him. And I
No.
didn't even want to fire him. It's just.
Yeah, but like you said, and of course I obviously wasn't there, but it just sounds like from what you're saying, you're put in a weird position, which is like, because you're the showrunner, right? So
Yeah.
you have to make those decisions, and that's a part of being a showrunner. Any, we talked about any managerial position, you have to manage people. That's the whole reason that you're in that
Right,
particular part of
right,
that job.
right,
And then, but there's like 130 people relying on this piece of work, and if it doesn't go through because of one person, then you have
right.
130 people who hate your guts, rather
I
than just
know.
one person.
Yeah, if they all found what, but gosh, Tim was really good, and he was very likable and very charming and funny in a subtle way. And the other actors,
Yeah.
not that any of them were bad, the other actors were good also, but they all played it very big. They went
Hmm.
for the jokes in a big way, and they pulled it off for their characters. But I would have kept the original cast, and I think the show might have run a long time. No, it wouldn't have, because Lou Ehrlich became president of ABC and decided comedy was a dead genre. So
Hmm.
he canceled all his comedies, including our show, which at the time was still in the top 10, even with the guy we replaced Tim with. We were in the top 10 when he canceled us.
Yeah. Were you saying, I think we
So
talked about that briefly, where you're saying that the only comedy they had on at the time was A-Team or something like that, shows like that.
they said the A-Team was the future of comedy. Yeah. The
Yeah.
A-Team was, for those of you who don't know, it was it's kind of like Mission Impossible with funny, silly characters. And it wasn't bad. It really wasn't bad, but they thought the new way was to go with these comedies. I mean, with these dramas, which had some comedy. They weren't even dramedies; they were dramas with some comedy.
Yeah.
And Lou Ehrlich was convinced that that was the future because A-Team was doing so well that he thought that was a future. You can't base the future on one example. That's like dumb.
Yeah.
I mean, Lou's probably a brilliant guy, but that was a dumb mistake, a stupid mistake to think that based on there were a few, like there was the A-Team, Miss Scarecrow, Mrs. King. There were several of them. They were all doing well. And in one season of all these shows doing so well, he decided to cancel comedy. And it's like, what? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Anyhow, well, let's talk. You ready to talk about Barney Miller a
Yeah,
little
sure.
bit?
Yeah, for sure.
Because a lot of you won't know Barney Miller because it goes back way back, but it was a classic example of the three jokes per page done really well.
Yeah. Also, it was just really popular on Twitter. I think like it was trending on Twitter, I want to say like a week ago or something like that, just because
Oh,
of
really?
the theme song. People picked like their favorite
Oh, yeah.
theme
Theme
song or
song
whatever.
was a great theme song. It was kind
Oh
of
yeah.
jazz. It was a jazz
Mm-hmm.
song. I don't remember it exactly, but
Yeah. And
it
so it
was
was
very
really
good.
good.
I remember it was really good, very good music.
Yeah, so we checked out the
Um,
pilot of this one and we compared it with Brooklyn Nine-Nine because they're both in that procedural, police station, cop genre comedies, which is kind of interesting. Very
to
different.
me, they're like the exact same setup. In
Yeah,
both cases, a small precinct doesn't it doesn't neither one plays real. And
yeah.
I've talked to a couple cops, but one in particular told me that it didn't seem neither one was at all real, but he enjoyed Barney Miller. He didn't enjoy Brooklyn Nine-Nine much, but he said
Hmm.
neither one was real.
Yeah.
That's
Well, yeah, I
what he
imagine
said.
not, you know what I mean? And more,
Yeah.
Barney Miller is, obviously a multi-camera show, so it reads, it views and seems much more like a stage play, it's
Yeah.
very,
And it was still in those days when we had three jokes per page, basically. So that means
yeah, for sure.
three jokes a minute, is about what it was, or a little more than a minute.
Some
So,
sight gags,
um,
like, you had to see the bars, that kind of thing in the very beginning. So we, in this one in particular, I don't remember him having a wife or anything like that,
yeah, they got
so
rid of that after. I think they started getting rid of the wife, played her less and less, and by the end of the first season, I think she was gone, and they just did the precinct.
so the premise of the pilot was it originally starts off with him in his apartment with his wife. His wife is making breakfast for the family and listening to the radio and hearing nothing but traumatic events, which I don't even know like if anybody would bat an eye at some of that stuff now because it's like so commonplace. But she was really upset with it, and so she tried to convince him to resign. She didn't want him to
Hmm.
continue being, and he was the captain, right? So
Yeah, captain of the
um,
precinct. Yeah.
she wanted to convince him to resign as a captain of the precinct. Of course, he was resistant to that idea, and she wanted him to move to Montana and raise some chickens, which I thought was pretty cool.
I know. Yeah.
She was on the right path. And he was resistant to it, and he kind of downplayed the violence that was going on the radio and that was going on in New York, and the dismal, dingy atmosphere of New York in the late 70s, which was probably some of the most dingy times, crime-ridden times of the New York lifestyle, New York living. And then then he goes on to work, after he convinces her that and they have kind of an interesting attitude or whatever, and then he goes off to work, and that's where the
Right, kind
show
of
picks up.
convincing her that it's not as, the crime or the danger is exaggerated by the news,
Yeah,
and that it's not really that bad.
yeah. And then turns out as soon as he gets to work, there's a mishap with it doesn't really matter if we give it away, I don't think,
Oh
but
yeah, nobody's going to see it now.
yeah.
But
So you get to meet some of the characters, and one of the things I want to talk about is diversity, which is something that they had in this show.
and that
That's
was early
interesting.
on. That was way back. I tried to do diversity myself later on. I think I told you I had
Yeah,
a couple shows like that, and it's just hard. The networks talk about diversity, or in those days they didn't, but
yeah.
they didn't really want it. They
It
didn't
wasn't
really
even a
want it.
buzzword at the time, diversity. You know what I mean? It was just
No,
like,
they
oh, you're
didn't use
casting
that.
this guy and this guy. So they had a Puerto Rican character, they have an Asian character, they got a like a Polish character, they got
Mm.
he's Jewish,
And
is that?
Barney was Jewish.
Yeah,
Barney
he's
was Jewish.
Jewish,
So they had
and
pretty
a
good
black guy,
coverage of all the, yeah, and a black guy. They had pretty good
Italian
coverage of
guy,
all
Abe
the.
Bagoda.
Oh,
Does he
right,
play
right, right, right.
Italian? Yeah.
So yeah, that's true. So they had a really good coverage
No women.
of minorities
Yeah, no
or
women.
minority interests, and it was way ahead of its time in that regard. And it was cool because everybody had a little influence from their own culture or their
Yeah.
own race or their own background, that played nicely into the show and gave you. It was a show with diversity. It was really, really nice, and the jokes were funny. The jokes
Hmm.
were good.
Yeah.
So it had solid
And
jokes,
quick.
great characters, very fast pace.
Yeah.
Three stories, three A stories, which is very unusual. Usually you have an A, B, and a C story. Each one's of less importance.
Hmm.
But Barney used to kind of say they had a cage story, which was the guy who was thrown into the jail. There was always
Yeah.
one of those. There was a personal story for Barney, and there was usually a procedural story,
Hmm.
for that involves all of them. But they
Right.
always had almost three A stories. So, it's three really important stories in every episode.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because, well, in the pilot, um, I think his name's Concho. Is that his name? The Puerto Rican guy. I can't remember his last name. I could pull up my
I
notes real
can't
quick.
remember his name. Well, it doesn't really matter.
Chano, Sergeant Chano, Detective Sergeant Chano Guayala. I can't pronounce the last name. And then Phil Fish, who is the Abe Vigoda. So they bring in a perp who got assaulted in his mind, he got assaulted after he tried to rob someone. And
Yeah.
so the setup is it's not as bad as it seems on the radio, and then
Uh-huh.
when Barney gets to work, he opens the door to the precinct and he has a gun in his face,
Right. Immediately. The first
immediately.
thing that
Yeah.
happens, the moment he steps into his workspace, there's a gun in his face.
Yeah.
So
And that's because
that
the
was
guy.
that was a joke. That was a
Yeah.
big joke.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing that the fish guy and the concho guy, they brought in this robber, and he asked to go to the restroom. And when he went to the restroom, he pulled the gun off of the Abe Vigoda character, and then he was holding everybody hostage in the precinct, or yeah, I guess it's a precinct you would call it.
It's really weird because the precinct would have been the whole
Yeah, the building,
building.
right?
So the idea was this was just one set of offices, or one set of desks and an office.
With a jail in there,
Yeah, it didn't make
holding
any
cell or
sense
something.
really. And then the rest of the precinct was off behind that door, and
Yeah.
it didn't really make sense logically or authentically. But the characters always felt real to me. The characters always
Hmm.
seemed authentic, and the situations, though they got a little broad, were pretty much authentic. In that they kept a sense of reality. They never got silly. They almost never were silly.
That's the thing I
And
liked about the characters too, is the realness of their characters, right? Like, you have a black guy, an Asian guy, a Polish guy, an Italian guy, Puerto Rican guy, Jewish guy, and that's not the focus of the story. Like they
no,
have those elements of themselves in the show, and they do talk about that, but it's not like, let me cater to him being Jewish, him being Puerto Rican, and that is an element of this of the story. The Puerto Rican guy didn't like the
yeah,
robber and didn't admit to being Puerto Rican because he was embarrassed that that guy was bringing his, the Puerto
yeah,
Ricans
because
down.
the robber assault person who created the assault was also a junkie, and he was
Yeah.
Puerto Rican. So the Puerto Rican cop was very hard on him and down on him because he felt he was bad.
Right.
He was bad for his people
Yeah.
because he was this kind of the stereotype Puerto Rican problem,
Hmm.
which was that was a stereotype, and so he hated that this guy was feeding the stereotype.
Right.
Um,
But they didn't do it in a PC way. It's not this, like, they didn't cater to the diversity police, to have all these this cast members in there. So that, and each individual character had some part of their personality in the show, in terms of like the phenotypical cover portion of their personality was imbued into the show. But it doesn't really hurt that they just were people, and happened to be of those particular backgrounds. It helped the story in some regard, but it wasn't like something that, was a setup to where you're being taught some lesson about those people. They were just in that environment together,
but
which I
I have
liked.
to
I thought that
say
was
that
cool.
I never really believed it was a police station. I
Hmm.
said that before, but I love the characters. I love the situations.
Yeah.
I love the jokes. I didn't buy the authenticity of it,
Yeah.
but it went on to win in its last year. It won an Emmy for best series.
Hmm.
It was always admired as a very good series, but as I said, a cop I talked to, I'm just curious. I said, well, does it offend you when people make jokes about cops like that? And he said, no. He said, I found it very funny, Barney Miller. I enjoyed the show, but it wasn't authentic. That's what he said to me.
Yeah. And well, I mean, the thing that was interesting, right, is like, while the robber's holding everyone hostage, it gives an opportunity to see why he's the captain, or why he's as good as at his job as he's good at his job, right? So like, he talks the guy down. He basically
Mm,
uses negotiating tactics without lying to him. He tells him at one point, like, hey, because the robber says, well, how about this? How about I just give you the gun and I just walk out of here like nothing happened? And all the other guys who are standing there with their hands up are like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then he says, I would love to tell you that that's the case, but honestly, like, if you give me the gun and you try to walk out of here like nothing happened, they're going to beat the hell out of you. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
he tells them, like, tell them that that's what's going to happen. And they're like trying to say, like, no, 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 that's not what's going to happen
mm,
here. But eventually he tells them that because he wants them to know that, like, look, I'm not lying to you. So that way he genuinely tried to help the guy out of the situation, and realized that
right,
he was kind of desperate. So he used a lot of reason and logic and
yeah.
empathy, and that's what won over the
And
robber.
it was all funny all along. That's what I
Yeah.
said. These guys were really good at telling their story, which was kind of a thin story because
Yeah. It was the thin. Yeah, it was
not
thin.
it was a thin story, but telling it in a reasonable way and still getting enough jokes in it. And that's really hard to do. Sometimes you get carried away with the jokes and you lose the story entirely, or you lose the sense of it feeling giving a suspension of disbelief because it's just too silly to be.
Yeah.
But you never felt it was silly. Barney never felt silly to me. And they did some kind of silly things sometimes, but everywhere, a couple maybe went too far, but overall, if you anybody listening or watching us wants to catch Barney Miller, I say it's a lot of fun. I think you should. I think if you can, you can buy the whole set for about $40. You can buy every episode ever shot for about,
Yeah.
I think I saw the set selling for $40 on Amazon, but you can also see some of them on YouTube. Um, and they're worth watching. They're fun.
Yeah, and it was interesting too, like, like you said, they had a sense of humor when he's doing this negotiation,
Yeah,
and it's
and
intense.
even the with the guy with the gun, actually, who was supposed to be some sort of junkie or drug addict or something, he was likable, sympathetic.
Yeah,
Even
yeah,
though he's got this gun and all these cops, you like the guy, and you were hoping he would get out. I was hoping
yeah,
somehow he'd get out somehow, but then Barney made it clear he's not going to let him out,
yeah,
even though that put everybody at risk being shot. Barney still said the truth is we're not going to let you go.
yeah. And then they threw in more jokes when Wojo stepped in. He has the gun drawn on him, so now it's a standoff, and Barney's in the
Mm.
middle. And then finally, when he reasoned one out, and he got the guy to give the gun over, Wojo says, "Well, why didn't you just hit the floor or whatever? I would have shot him." And he's like, "Well, I've seen you at the range, so I knew his chances of hitting me was 50-50, but with you, it's like I don't think my odds are that high."
Yeah,
So they had some jokes, and then he went back to the house and you know tried to make light of the day and didn't want to admit to his wife and daughter and kids that that it was that kind of an intense moment until the DA boyfriend guy. That was an interesting tie-in where the DA was the
yeah,
boyfriend, and he spilled the beans, and of course the wife was scared or whatever. For
yeah. And so she was upset. I don't remember how it ended though. Wait, so she was upset.
yeah.
He said, "This is what I do. You got to live with it." And how did it end? What was the final moment? You remember?
Basically, I remember like there was a joke saying that like because it was a callback joke to the Studebaker. He's like, I heard of a guy who's
Oh,
got a
that's right, right,
a
right, right, right.
Studebaker for sale, which had to do with their earlier life or whatever. And then the son came in and said bang, like he'd
Yeah,
sticking
so
him up.
it wasn't a great ending.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a great ending for the episode. For me, ended when they left the precinct back to the home. The home really wasn't neither side, neither the beginning or the end really engaged me much. They were just a bunch of jokes in a
Yeah.
family life. The, the same writers are writing it and still doing a lot of jokes, but the jokes weren't playing as
Hmm.
such an interesting way in the family. And so within I think with somewhere within the first season, I don't think they got through the whole season with the family. They eventually just dropped it all and just stayed in the precinct.
Yeah, I mean you can see why. I mean all the actions in the precinct, and like you said, it's just kind of thin. I mean, it had more story than Big Bang Theory. Like if we were to analyze those
Mm-hmm.
two and compare those
Mm-hmm.
two, it was a much more robust story than Big Bang, which is just really thin. I couldn't believe how thin it was actually when I watched the pilot. But in comparison to like something like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, they stuffed a lot of story into 22 minutes for Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It was very, and
So
that,
let's talk. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I
I
didn't
was
mean
just
to
saying that's because they
interrupt.
do a lot of flashbacks, and they do a lot more character development, a lot more expository, um, you know, mentioning of character personalities and stuff that you had to watch
You know
Barney
what?
Miller to get any of that.
Yeah, Barney Miller and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, as I said, are the same setup.
Hmm.
Cops in a make-believe precinct that's still too small to be real, and
Hmm.
also doesn't involve the other elements of a precinct. So it's just an isolated little section of
Yeah.
that doesn't feel real. But to me, Barney felt more real, and I think you and I might disagree on this. I thought Barney felt more real than Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Oh no, I agree.
Oh, you agree? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Brooklyn Nine-Nine is campy and purposefully goofy, and that's the main character, Jake Peralta, played by Adam Sandberg. It's over the top. It's like almost, it's not Naked Gun over the top. It doesn't go that far, but it's
Yeah.
definitely like, he's got a goofiness to it. I mean, and in fact, that's
Mhm.
the crux of the character is he refuses to grow up. He's more of a juvenile who happens to be adept at solving crimes, and
Right, right.
he's hitting on his coworker, and so there's a lot more like, comparatively to Barney Miller, there's no women except for in the bookends. There's no women in the precinct, and then
Yeah.
in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, in the pilot and the rest of the series, women are an integral part of being
Mm.
detectives and solving crimes, and they're competitive against each other. So in that sense,
Yeah.
but it has a very woke, diverse cast. And so
It does too. Yeah. That they had in common too, and that
yeah.
there was Pretty good diversity, more diversity in Barney Miller,
Yeah.
but there was, and to me, my favorite character was always the captain, the black captain, whose name I can't remember.
Holt, Captain
Holt,
Holt.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That he was really an interesting character.
Mhm.
He just played so many interesting um contrasts within the
Mhm.
character, and that guy's really a good actor. Again,
Mhm.
um, where Sandberg to me is not a great actor. He's funny, but he's not a great actor.
Yeah.
And to me, it always looked like he was smirking and ready to do his next joke.
Yeah, he's definitely tongue in cheek, like for sure.
Yeah, but the captain seemed like he was authentic, and yet he was doing stuff just as big and broad as the Sandberg's character. So
He brings
it's
in a lot more
interesting.
depth of like, he brings in the seasoned professional acting depth, to give the show a
Yeah.
bit of realism, which is, his character also supports that, that position. He's much more serious, but
Yeah, yeah, he's more serious, but he sometimes gets really goofy as well. But when he's
Mhm.
goofy, I believe his goofiness where I swear Sandberg, this is where again, I'm not a big fan of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I'm more of a fan of Barney Miller because Sandberg has this knack and people love him and he's great at what he does because the series has been a big hit and people but I always feel he's just ready for the next joke. I never get a moment from him even
Mhm.
where it feels like he's sincere.
Mhm. Yeah, he doesn't have
You
that. No, yeah, I
doesn't have
mean,
a moment of it.
but he's
Yeah.
surrounded by other characters who seem sincere, so it kind of weighs it down and brings a little bit more. And it
Mhm.
actually makes him seem in that context, in that environment, the standout juvenile, which is, they wrote correctly for
Which
his
what they did for,
character.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, if you could watch either one in more seasons, which one would you pick?
Well, I mean, I wrote a spec for Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I like the show, but
Yeah.
I watched a lot of that show. And again, I wrote the spec at the time that I wrote the spec. I think I was doing like trying to do like Nickelodeon diversity writers, uh, whatever that thing is that they do, the program. So I wrote it for that, so I had to become familiar. It wasn't something I was already like really enthusiastic about. So I learned to like the show and I like the characters
Mhm.
and I like
Yeah.
Boyle. He's the guy who's the foodie, he's from, I think
Yeah,
City
yeah,
State
that's
or
an
something
interesting
like
thing.
that.
You didn't see he did that real well.
Yeah.
His and I like the women in the show too. I thought that they were really interesting. And they seem more authentic, even though
Yeah.
they're broad characters. The women were too. They seemed everybody seemed authentic to me. Not everybody. I should take that back. The women seemed authentic to me. The captain seemed authentic, and um, um, Sandberg's character did not seem authentic, and neither did the other character, the big muscular sergeant.
Mhm.
He seemed a little less. Well, not as far as Sam. What's Sandberg's character's name?
Jake Peralta.
Jake. Yeah, yeah. Jake was the. Everybody else seemed more authentic to me. I have to say, I'm trying to think who I didn't. I think Jake Boyle was a little hard to buy,
Mhm.
though he was funny.
Yeah, he's
So
funny. What they do differently in this show versus like say like Barney Miller. Barney Miller on its face doesn't have as much psychological depth as what they're presenting to you on the face of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So like with Jeffries, he's in therapy because he had an
mm,
incident and he'd lost his edge. Holt is gay, and that's it's not like something they just bring up for the sake of just bringing it up. It actually
mm,
derailed his career, the trajectory
mm.
of his career.
Yeah,
um
yeah. Well, I
Santiago's
thought, I
competitive
I
because
don't
she
know.
had brothers and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah. She comes from a family of cops who were all males.
Yeah, I don't know if they're all cops, but
Um,
they're all males for sure.
oh, I thought they were all cops.
They may have been. I may
I
have
don't
missed that,
remember.
but and
Yeah,
then Chelsea Peretti's character, she's snarky. She's got that snarky. She's not really a cop, but she's like the secretary or the
yeah. You know
operator
what?
or
I
something.
think I think that as far as depth of character and depth of story, I really Barney is equal to and Brooklyn Nine-Nine pretty equal in terms of the depth of character and the areas they pursued. I just think Barney played it more real
Mhm.
than, but like you said, it's almost a lampoon. It's
Yeah.
almost supposed to be over the top,
Mhm.
the Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So,
It's not as far as like Angie Tribeca, which came out in a similar time frame.
mhm,
You know, I don't know if have you
yeah,
seen Angie Tribeca
I,
before?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, I
Uh,
thought that was super funny. Out of the preference at the time when I was watching it, I liked Angie Tribeca. I like that lampoon, Naked Gun sensibility. I like
mm,
that
yeah,
absurd
if you
sensibility.
commit to that, once you commit to that, they get the bigger laughs. They get it can be very entertaining.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, yeah. So,
I mean, whereas
the,
like with Barney Miller, the they're dealing again with like a more um like what they're dealing with is a more significant story, like with the guy being a junkie. And it wasn't for it wasn't for the laughs. The point of the show was to show how he can use reason to
uh,
win over a delicate situation.
mm,
And he navigates that in his home life. That was the point of the show. Um with Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Jake Peralta's character, it's baked in that he's already really good at his job. You know what I mean? So
mm,
he just kind of deduces things in almost like this Sherlock Holmes type of way, which is, they give him like this, fifth sense of, figuring things out. So it moves the story along that
yeah.
much faster.
But he is a clown, and he
Yeah.
purposely is a clown. Where there's no clowns in Barney Miller. They're all
No.
cops. They're all
Yeah.
cops who have interesting attitudes. But Jake is a clown. He purposely makes jokes. He
Yeah.
purposely sets up situations that are funny and silly and weird. But he's
Mhm.
in control of them, so you don't think it's just writers who are getting silly. It's the character is a silly person, is a
Yeah.
childish man, a man child.
And he
So
knows he's silly, whereas like
yeah,
other characters, like Boyle, for example, isn't being silly. He that's his as a
mm,
character, that's his personality. It reads
yeah,
as hilarious, where in Diaz, she's like a hard ass. So, she's that like angry character that like is unrelentingly like upset about multiple things, and you have to peel away those layers to try to get a softer core, which she doesn't want people to get close to. She's using it as a defense. And Santiago is a bit more competitive because she's more of a corporate climber.
uh-huh,
She has ambition. So
yeah.
it gives her a
So it's
different type of
really
personality.
so they're both very good. I would watch Barney though. If somebody said you can revive either, they're both gone now. I mean, I think Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I think finished last season. I think
I
was their
think it's this
last.
last season this year,
Oh, is it this year?
this fall.
But if
I'm
they
not
said you
sure.
could see more of either one, I would choose Barney. But they're very similar in setup and even in some of their pursuits of storylines. But there's something very comical, almost to the point of silliness. We call it a lampoon. I think that's fair to say it's a
Hmm.
lampoon.
Yeah.
It's an exaggerated reality where Barney
Certainly.
tries to be real in an environment that isn't real enough. So neither one is authentic enough if you really one of these people who really wants the real thing.
Hmm.
No cops behave the way any of those cops behave.
Yeah, and and I don't know that people are really tuning in for that type of grittiness. You'd probably watch more like not CSI, yeah, CSI, or what's the other one? The one that lies like dun dun,
Law and order,
Law
law
and
and order.
Order.
Yeah, yeah.
And this one, so like if you compare, because we talked about character growth in terms of like being, a craft issue, like when you're talking about script writing, and so Barney Miller, the only character growth in the entire show was the robber character. He's the only one that went from being erratic and self-serving, which I guess he's still self-serving because he just was convinced that this was his only route. He didn't actually really grow as a character. Nobody really grew in that
Yeah.
episode. Barney Miller was the same in the beginning
Mm.
bookend as he was at the end of the bookend. But Jake Peralta grew as a character slightly, just because he realized the reason that Holt wants him to wear a tie is because Holt's career was derailed and he always wanted to be a part of a team. So now that he's the coach of the team, he wants his team to wear ties so that everybody knows they're a unit, they're a team, and
Mm.
so in this realization at the very in the end of the third act, where they're getting the criminal, he makes this realization. But again, they're very on the nose. That's part of the comedy with this type of show. They're on the nose with their emotional developments. They state those things out loud, rather than you kind of having to pay attention and learn those type of movements throughout the character's existence, the character arcs in a show like Barney Miller, where but again, there's no growth. That when we
Yeah.
talked before about like TV characters being a solid, basically a pillar of that character, they stay the same way in Barney Miller, whereas in Brooklyn Nine-Nine,
There's
eh,
some growth. Well, he
yeah.
ends up marrying Santiago, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think they have a kid together. I haven't
Yeah,
seen any
yeah.
of the later seasons. I think
Yeah,
after I
yeah.
wrote the spec, I did enough research. I stopped watching the show.
Well, he flirts with
It was
her a
good.
lot. Then he
Yeah,
eventually dates her and then marries her. And I think maybe they have a kid. I didn't follow it that far
yeah,
either.
I think that's
But
accurate.
see, when Barney was of the time, and I told you 3 jokes a page,
Yeah.
and also no growth.
Hmm.
They told you no growth.
Yeah.
You sold the series based on these characters. We're going to keep those characters until the series dies. As long as the series runs, we're
Right.
not going to change those characters because those are the characters that the audience was pulled into.
Yeah.
Where today shows have to grow. It's accepted, and even if this is what they bought into, the audience expects growth. And if you
Yeah.
don't give them growth, after a while they get bored with it. But in those days, we were told no growth, characters do not evolve, 3 jokes a page. It was just
That's why I think like this era of writing more complements your natural tone of writing because your characters grow in an episode. You have
oh,
that
I
natural
like that. Yeah,
sensibility. Yeah, that's a very difficult thing to do to pull off genuinely. Because like you said before, you can't really make a character grow, um, without putting a 500-pound gorilla in there or something. I don't know exactly how you phrased it, and it definitely wasn't the way I just said it. But
yeah.
like you can't. You have to force a character to grow, and if you don't put a big enough circumstance in the situation, then the character won't grow. It'll be super
Mm.
incremental, and to make it visible. So, like with Coach's daughter, she had to have a huge growth. The Elise character.
She grew because she was
Yeah.
she was a transient character. She was
Right.
just there for the episode. She could grow,
Yeah.
but others couldn't.
And that's kind of similar. It's not obviously similar in the sense that like a transient character is the one that grew. With Barney Miller, the transient character is the one that transformed, right? So he's the one that relinquished the his erratic behavior and chose a better path,
Right. He decided to trust a cop, which was that was his growth in that
Right.
thing. And he didn't trust anybody, and then he trusts Barney.
Yeah.
And
And
in
that's because
return for
Barney
that,
showed him some empathy, showed him some sympathy and empathy.
and honesty, he told him,
Yeah.
if you put down your gun, you're gonna get beat up by all these cops.
Right.
Which is really something you don't even want to say today. But he said,
Yeah. Yeah. Like we pretend like
if
that's
you
not a
put down your
reality.
gun and you walk out, not gonna happen. You put down the gun, you can get beat up by all these cops who are pissed that you held them hostage.
And that's actually what
Um,
makes it more real, I think, because that is, not only are we familiar with that reality in the world, but definitely in that time period, you would expect them to. I feel like the 70s, the 60s, 70s, they had more honesty in their behavior. Like you knew what the score was. Where now, like
yeah.
with Brooklyn Nine-Nine, they're gonna pretend that they wouldn't do something like that. Cops don't do that. They're goofy.
Yeah, they did have. There was that sense you would never believe for a moment that there was some danger to the perpetrator because nobody in Brooklyn Nine-Nine would beat up anybody. At
Yeah.
least not the way they were portrayed. They're not going to
Yeah.
beat up characters. But in Barney, I can see some of them might, especially whatever. So, that's interesting because these are 2 shows with the exact same setup. That's also something I say to people who say, well, that was done before. It doesn't matter if it was done before as long as you do it differently.
Right.
Everything's been done before. The Greeks wrote plays that were, Shakespeare's plays were based on things that were created by the Greeks, who
Mhm.
were, from their predecessors, from stories from
The
the Bible
Sumerians or
or
something.
whatever.
Yeah.
It's like it goes way, way back.
Mhm.
Everything's been kind of done. You have to find a way to make it feel new. You
Mhm.
take something that's been done and make it feel new. It's rarely, rarely you see something that you say, I've never seen before. I don't think it's possible. Not after this many years of plays and shows and
Well, it's all your
movies and
particular voice,
television.
like that's where a voice comes in, right? Like the writer's voice. So like what's your comedic sensibility? Are you more Andrew Tribeca? Are you more Brooklyn
Yeah.
Nine-Nine? Are you more Barney Miller? And you could
So
still have
but if
humor in all
I
of those.
right, and if I describe to you Barney Miller and I describe to you Brooklyn Nine-Nine, without showing you an episode, it's very possible you'd say, I don't see the difference. It
Mhm.
seems like the same show. But boy, you watch them and you don't feel you're watching the same show.
No, not at all. I mean, it's like as different as, any other show. I mean, basically, like you said, there's a grittiness to well, first of all, there's a grittiness to the set. Like if we're just talking craft alone, right? Like the set itself is a grittier set. It's a different type of lighting than you'd have in
Mm,
Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Brooklyn Nine-Nine now it follows that traditional trajectory of being like a bright place that seems kind of clean, like whereas
mm-hmm,
Barney Miller seems gritty. It seems dirty. There's shadows in the corners, like
mm-hmm,
and there's not a lot of corners in that set, you know what I mean? And it is ridiculous to have desks and that's where they do all their detective work and they have a holding cell in there. Like those would be in completely separate, in my experience of prisons, the prison system, those would be in separate areas, but
oh, sure. It's also because you just wouldn't process somebody and put them in a jail, right, in a cell, right where the desks are for all these officers.
yeah.
It just didn't make any sense. But when they did it, I don't know, they didn't really care that much. Actually, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, it's a bigger set,
Yeah.
so it feels more authentic, and there's no holding cell in it, which makes it feel more authentic. And in some ways, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is a less authentic show, had a more authentic set.
Yeah, they
It's
have the
just,
bullpen or the bullpit or whatever you want to call
yeah,
it. And
yeah.
then, Captain has his own office. Well, which I guess Captain Miller had his own office, Barney Miller had his own office and everything.
But
But
it was
the thing
also
with
tight. It was also tight. It just didn't feel. I mean, you say, okay, this is a really small precinct somewhere. Where in New York would there be a precinct like this? It just didn't seem like it. It didn't
the
seem
interesting
like it.
thing too, like with Wojo in the beginning of the pilot, he's bringing that Harry. I just remember because I watched it recently, so that's why I only have this font, the quickness of the names. But Harry was the criminal they put in there for, you know, doing illegal gambling or something. So
Yeah, yeah. He was a bookie.
yeah, they treat their prisoners with humanity. That's one of the things that they're not. It's the job. They don't take it personally. Like they have that kind of objectivity about the people they're putting in the jail. They're not where in reality, and this is the thing that these shows are not really representing about the police system. And this is like you ever seen Zimbardo, that Zimbardo Stanford experiment where they took two groups of students and they dressed one up in prisoners. They made a mock prison in the basement, and they had
Hmm.
prisoners and guards, police. And within a week, they had to cancel the experiment because kids started having mental breakdowns because the police became really brutal and the prisoners started a revolt, because of the
Uh,
mistreatment. And this is like
uh-huh.
a real experiment in Stanford by Philip Zimbardo, and he came to the conclusion. I don't know, maybe he's revised it since I watched that documentary or whatever, but he came to the conclusion that like if you give a person a station and the attire to go with that station, they'll lean into that with their personality and they'll make justifications for behaving a certain way and treating other people who are positioned against them or what have you with their attire and their behaviors. And so you have these rivalries that can happen, especially in an environment like that. So they're not really, none of these shows are showing a disdain for the characters for, you know, ruining their breakfast because now they got to go out and solve this crime or something like that, or whatever, because police have a brutal job. I wouldn't say that police have an easy job, and some people handled it better than others. You know what I mean? Some people really are. They take out a lot of aggressions on the people that they work with because
Right. You never see any of that in either of these comedies. So
yeah,
I mean, there's a little. Sometimes Jake gets a little harsh on the, but never where you feel that there's any reality to that. You know what
no,
I
and in
mean?
fact, he's kind of joking with the guy that he's got held at gunpoint toward the end. You know what I mean? He's
Yeah,
doing a little bit of, he's explaining his character growth to this guy. You know what I mean? And that guy interjects. He's like, "Are you talking about me?" And he's like, "No, I'm not talking about you." And like, I'm talking to Doctor or Captain Holt over here, and so
mm,
that's what makes it goofy. I mean, that's the part of it
I
that's
know.
enjoyable, that it's not reality. And I don't think we're always watching something. It's not a documentary. We're not really watching it for that
No, like you said, if you
type of
wanted to
reality.
watch something that's felt more realistic, you would watch Law and Order. You know, that
Yeah.
feels very real to me, and it's built in a way that's supposed to feel real, and even that's not totally real. I mean, it's
Right.
like,
Yeah. No.
but it's more real than Barney Miller or Brooklyn Nine-Nine in terms of how they set up the cops and how the cops behave. But um, it's interesting because people don't speak as sharply as they do in anything that's on TV or in the movies. People,
Except for
there's
this
no,
show.
yeah, people don't waste time. You know, when you write dialogue, everything has to have a purpose and move right along. In
Right.
real life, most of what we say is just filler to get to those moments where there is something. You can't have any filler
Right.
in television or movies. So it's none of it's real, and yet we can suspend our disbelief. It's amazing how we can do that. I get caught up in some of these, like someone like Law and Order. Something like you're really angry at the guy who's getting away with having killed somebody that you really cared about something, and you go, wait a minute. First of all, it's all fiction, and
Yeah.
secondly, people don't really react that way, and every line is so on purpose, even if you try and make it not look like it's constructed, but
Hmm.
but be authentic. And yet I can suspend my disbelief and get so caught up in some of these. I never get that way with the comedies, though. I have
Yeah.
to admit that.
Well, watch
Barney
Ted
Miller,
Lasso.
yeah. Well, really,
Yeah. I mean,
neither
it just
neither
draws
neither
you in.
Barney nor Brooklyn Nine-Nine ever makes me get. I don't even think I suspend my disbelief in either one of those. I just
No.
enjoy the characterizations and the lines and the actions, and I never get really involved. I never feel any real energy. But Ted Lasso, like the way you're describing Chang See, probably where you're really rooting for somebody to
Yeah.
come through or succeed.
Hmm.
I never felt that with Barney or Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yeah. I mean, I used to watch Barney Miller a lot when I was a kid, and so I'm very familiar with a lot of the shows, the episodes. And I'd have to go back to really, revisit that stuff and really get us now to different, maturity level, understand more what they're doing. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, like I said, I watched a lot of it, so I got really into the show for a little bit. But
Yeah.
one of the things I was thinking of, and you bring up a good point, which is as a writer, right? Like you're writing dialogue to not only sing, out of the, from the voice of the actor. It's got to have like a certain kind of eloquence to it, and it's got to be
Mhm.
succinct, and it's a writer's language, right? Right. So like if you bring up Law and Order in that regard, they have these quippy little like back and forth that are very writerly. And if you watch like Billions, I was saying this to my wife the other day. Billions is like you have a character who's seemingly he wasn't educated, he wasn't well educated, but he's all knowing somehow, and he has like the most eloquent, like high-minded, like high education type of conversations with people in this quippy,
Yeah.
truncated dialogue. There's no ums and or anything like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it totally makes me think like there's a writer behind this dialogue. You know what I mean?
But do you ever suspend your disbelief with Billions?
Sure, I love the show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
and I
So
compared it to like, have you seen Succession? You watched that one at
I
all?
have. I've seen some of those. Yeah.
So Succession, right? They're supposed to be super wealthy, and in terms of pilots, right? Billions, you have a pilot where it looks like they have a lot of money. They have a lot of set pieces. They have a lot of movement, a lot of characters, and they do a fantastic job drawing you into all. They have a lot of characters and pull you into each different character. It's very good
Mm,
writing. And then they have
yeah,
an elevated language also on top of that. Succession,
yeah.
I've only seen the pilot and maybe the second episode, is a longer show by like 10 minutes, but it moves much more quickly. And it looks to me like their budget was not as high as Billions. So like the first
Mm,
episode, the pilot, they probably spent most of their budget on getting these 3 helicopters to fly to some unknown grass field in probably like Governor's Island or something in New York or whatever. And then so they spent all this money doing that. And so the next episode is primarily in the hospital, and it's a more of a stage play. To me, it's as a viewer, it's almost more of a single camera stage play type of presentation of a story. And
mm,
Billions is like almost like a movie, like each
uh-huh,
episode is very involved and very in depth.
yeah.
And the characters in Billions, I don't know how authentic they are to hedge fund personalities. I don't know that every hedge fund has the same type of personalities, but they're interesting. They're interesting to watch.
Mm.
Their
Yeah,
characterizations are very interesting.
that's the skill you have to develop as a writer, where you can your language and your storytelling is not reality.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I was gonna say. Successions, the language is not as elevated. It's definitely like, and it's
Yeah.
more contemporary. It's a very
Mm,
contemporary, a lot of cursing, a lot of like references to sexual. There's a lot of sexual stuff that goes on nowadays in the dialogue. Like Ted Lasso even
mm.
has that kind of stuff going on, and it's very contemporary in comparison to other shows that don't have that.
Yeah, but a show's not well written feels written. A
Hmm.
show that's well written does not feel written unless you're analyzing like we are.
Hmm.
Obviously, the difference between a real moment and a fictional moment that's supposed to feel real are not this. They just aren't the same. But as a good writer, you have to make your audience get sucked into that reality that you create. That's more intense and more constant and more driven and a faster pace than life is.
Hmm.
And yet believe it, but not believe it so much that they ever are going to flinch or get scared by something you see that, well, that's not true. Because I don't know. I've been writing for a long time, and I still could tell you, you kind of have to feel your way through. Sometimes your dialogue, a really clever piece of dialogue, can feel fake.
Yeah, it
and
can throw
and
you off.
and then throws it, it ruins the moment. It
Hmm.
ruins the moment. So you gotta make your audience feel that it's real, and yet it's never really real. It's never really the way people will talk. Even when you have an illiterate prisoner in Law and Order, everything they say though still drives your story forward, or sucks your audience into the moment or the character, and yet they sound they sound inarticulate and almost illiterate, and yet everything they say is so important. That's the trick of being a writer who succeeds. You've got to create a reality that your audience will accept, that isn't real but feels real, as opposed to something that feels fake. And
Hmm.
it's really you got to feel your way through that. I can't really tell you that there are hard and fast rules about how to do that.
It is interesting though, like you said, like Law and Order or Billions. Law and Order, if you kind of pull away, it's almost like they all speak the same language. It's like a Sorkin film where they're all talking very fast and they all kind of seem to have these like irreverent references that are very educated. And not every person is going to be like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have some characters that are, like take for example, going back to Cheers. Cheers is a great example where you have a Frasier character and a Coach character, and then you have a Carla and Norm and Cliff. They have distinct personalities. They're not,
Mm,
and their references are distinct to that personality, to that character. So it doesn't, it's like when you watch Dennis Miller, right? Like if you watch Dennis Miller, the references that guy throws out are just like insane. They're so buried in whatever kind of reading he's got going on that it doesn't appeal to the average person. So like in Law and Order, for example, you have an inarticulate, um, what was the word that you used? Not
Illiterate.
illiterate character, right?
Yeah.
He can't start doing, Shakespearean soliloquies.
Yeah.
It's just not. And sometimes those people are poetic. You know what I mean? So it depends on the character, but that's the thing I noticed about Billions is he's not he's not a highly educated person, yet he seems to have these conversations that, like he went to a Harvard or Yale or some kind of Ivy League program or
Mm,
something like that. And it kind of pulls me out. I'm like, how is he this all knowing
mm.
and well educated? It kind of
Yeah.
pulls me out.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
not to say that people who don't go to a traditional Ivy League school can't be, I didn't, they can't be educated. They can't pick up
Mm,
on things. It just like, for whatever reason, when I'm analyzing the character, the other, his rival, the Paul Giamatti character, Rhodes, he has that background. So his
mm.
stories and his references, it makes sense for him. This it fits with his character. So it's what makes them interesting rivals. But at the
Yeah.
same time, sometimes it pops me out of it's like watching a
But
Tarantino movie. Like these
mm,
characters have these really elaborate
mm.
dialogue moments, and it like jerks me out of the character. I'm like, this guy's he's like supposed
Y-
to be a farmer or something.
You know who does that on TV? Well, he's not. He doesn't much of it, but Sorkin used to
Sorkin,
write
yeah,
that way.
for sure.
That his stuff would be so unreal because everybody seemed to be so articulate, so well spoken,
Yeah,
so um
unnaturally so. Super educated.
unnatural, unnatural. But it was fascinating
Yeah.
because I still was fascinated by it.
Hmm.
I would watch his stuff and always enjoy it.
Certainly.
I,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. And that's the thing, if your style is to have that particular worldview of all your characters, and that's your style, like a Wes Anderson film always looks like a Wes Anderson film, like you're
Mhm.
always going to have that color palette and the framing, center framing, and this narrator type of dialogue interplaying in between the characters' actions and conversations, and that's all. And it's in a world unto itself, and that's his world. He creates those
Yeah.
worlds, and you're watching it for that particular reason. So you're watching a Sorkin film for that particular rhythm and pacing. Whether it's
Mm.
West Wing or The Social Network or something, but yeah, so as an analyzer, somebody who's analyzing this kind of stuff, just as a person who's interested in the craft portion of it, it can pop you out of it. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean it ruins it, but it's something I noticed. You know what I mean?
That's what I was gonna say. If you start to analyze any show, you can very quickly uh, see all the pieces and no longer have the entertainment that you get when you watch it the first time.
Yeah.
So if I always watch a show first. I don't
Right.
try and analyze it first. I watch a show and enjoy it,
Yeah.
and then I analyze it. Once I analyze it, I find a lot of flaws, even things that
Hmm.
are things that don't aren't
Logical
appropriate.
gaps.
Yeah, yeah.
you know?
But if the first time you watch it and you're really entertained and engaged, that's good writing. And nobody's supposed to be analyzing it except those of us who want to write and analyze.
Yeah.
But the average person watches it to be entertained. They're entertained. Sorkin was very entertaining in all his work, or still is. And it doesn't matter that nobody talks, almost nobody talks the way they talk, that everybody talks
Yeah.
this way. But you know what I think is really important is consistency.
Hmm. Yes.
If you create a certain reality where everybody's very articulate and then you maintain that, people will stay with it, and then they're jolted if maybe somebody doesn't speak that way or doesn't
Right.
fit into that. So I think once you create your world and your tone and your style, if you're consistent with it and make good choices in terms of developing your story and your characters, then you hold your audience. But
Right.
if you break with those rules and the parameters and the paradigms and everything that you created early on, if you break those and you break them even inconsistently, it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. Your eyes is going to be distracted. So when people say you want people to suspend their disbelief, it's a strange thing because you never in a theater really ever think that what you're watching is real.
Right.
And yet you can get scared. Somebody gets shot in the eye or some horrific thing, and you cringe and you go, no. And if it was a hero, you feel torn by it, and but you know it's not real. You walk out of that theater not feeling the profound um, sadness that you'd feel if you really lost somebody of that nature,
Hmm.
because you know it didn't really happen, but you're into it enough that you feel enough of that feeling that it worked for you. But I've never been in a theater where I ever forget and I forget I'm in a theater. You know, what I mean, it
Hmm.
just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I maybe don't forget. I maybe will get so sucked in that I'm not paying that much attention to my environment. Just because I'm so focused on the story, you get a little bit of a tunnel vision. But yeah, it is. What a unique thing that we do to just. You can do this with books too, or reading scripts or whatever, to where you just get so involved in what's happening that you care about the characters. Like for example,
Right.
I've seen all the Harry Potter movies, right? I never read the
Hmm.
book. I've seen all the Harry Potter movies. Then I read the book and I was like, what's going to happen to Harry? You know what I mean? But it's like, I already fucking know. I've seen every single movie. You know what I mean? I know what's happening to Harry. But the way
Yeah.
she wove that tale was like,
Yeah.
wow, this is great writing. She's a good
Yeah.
writer.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
That
She
first book
is.
was
She
really,
is.
really good.
And that's the interesting thing about it is that you don't have to fully believe. You never suspend your disbelief to the point that you ever get like you were saying. So say that somebody in your book you're reading dies. I've had that where I've read it and a character I love dies, and I get so emotional, so upset. I've wept. I've
Hmm.
actually put it down, and yet I know it's not the weeping and the sorrow that I'd feel had I really known that person.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But enough that I feel the emotion, but not so much that I feel the pain and agony of really losing somebody.
Yeah, there was this book I read when I was a kid. I think it's like Where the Cranberries Grow or something like that. I can't remember what the title is right now. I have to look it up. But it was you've seen the movie My Girl, right? Like the with
Huh?
Macaulay Culkin and
Mm-hmm.
I think that other girl. So it was based off that story. That movie is based off of this book, and I think it was like one of those early books to where it was so profound that it really kind of caught me off guard. And not only was I like sad about the character dying or whatever, but it made me realize like when I read other books, like, oh, this is garbage. This isn't do anything. This is a nothing story. Like it doesn't really mean
Mm-hmm.
anything. And that kind of shaped the way I read. And it actually made me not want to read for a long time because I realized like, oh, I didn't realize until later the reason why I didn't want it is because not every book needs to have that. But it was
Mm-hmm.
such a profound moment that I was like, wow, this is what a book is supposed to do. It's supposed to move you forward in life or whatever. But yeah, it's you get really involved and I guess that's why we have fans and people. If a character, like, I guess they ended a character on Downton Abbey or whatever, and everybody got so upset that they threatened not to watch the next season or
Uh-huh.
whatever.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I haven't seen the show. My mom really loves that show. Maybe I should check it out. People love it, but
I remember when one of the characters died in childbirth, or was it in childbirth, or there was some complication of, I can't remember now exactly. Somebody, one of the main characters died, and I saw it, and I felt really sad,
yeah.
but not as sad as if that person were real. And that's the
That's weird,
point.
right? Isn't that
Yeah.
weird? Like that sometimes you'll have, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll have more of an emotional reaction to things that happen in television or movies or even commercials sometimes than like what happens in my regular life. Somebody will tell me
Mm,
something that's tragic and I'll feel it, but it's more of to me, it's more of a milk jug effect. Like it doesn't affect me at the moment. And, like a milk jug, you push it on the counter and it sluggishly moves and then it hops a little bit because it's got the liquid to push it along. So that's kind of what happens to me with real life stuff is sometimes people tell me something and
mm.
like the impact of it on me isn't as
Well, some
severe
of it doesn't seem
right
real.
away.
I've had that. I've had somebody tell me something, even when it's tragic and you don't totally engage in it. And you can engage in something that in a movie because a good writer has pulled you into it and set you up and made you feel it. And sometimes something can happen tragic in real life. News happens all the time. I see a news story, something, somebody died, something terrible. There was a terrible injustice.
Yeah.
And it's just more news.
Hmm.
And sometimes not. Sometimes I'll get really involved. I've wept over things I've seen on news,
Hmm.
a lesser story than some bigger tragedy. It's a really weird thing. It's a
It
weird
is
thing.
weird. And it's like, I don't analyze my own psyche too much, to figure out like why that is. Sometimes I'll see a commercial and it'll really hit me for whatever reason.
Yeah, yeah.
you
Sometimes I'm
know?
moved by commercials. I've been moved by commercials.
Yeah. And then, but
Um,
something in real life and I don't like shrug, but I'm just like, like, damn, that sucks. But it doesn't hit me in the same way, even though I actually probably have some interaction with that story. It's very weird. It's
yeah.
bizarre. But like you said, it's part of that is the way that a story has been woven. Like, they're giving you these little hints, and the stuff that we get in real life kind of catches you off guard. You're not expecting it, so you don't
Uh-huh.
know how to react to it. You didn't have the preparation. But in a story that you're watching and you're engaged in, you're seeing the little finite pieces come together for that culmination,
Mhm.
and then that payoff is that cathartic moment that you have that really kind of like rockets the emotion ship to outer space. I
Yeah.
mean, it's kind of, I don't know, it's
Yeah,
very unusual.
I've actually watched movies where a character look curious about dies or has a terrible misfortune or something goes very wrong in their life. And I actually have to sometimes say that's fiction. It's
Hmm.
fiction. I have to remind myself it's fiction because I do get too sucked into it to the point
Yeah,
that I'm emotionally upset and I'm going, it didn't happen.
yeah.
It didn't happen. You got to remind yourself it did not happen.
And I also do this thing too, where if there's a character that's a real dick or like, a terrible person or whatever in this movie I saw, it's hard for me to disengage from that personality type if I see them in something else. There's a
Oh,
few,
really?
yeah,
Huh?
there's a few character actors where I'm like, that person has been cast as somebody that's kind of like that. And they may be a perfectly lovely
Mm,
person in real life, but for whatever reason, I'm like, that guy, you just can tell he just has that asshole look on his face, you know what I mean? And
mm,
and
yeah. It's a funny thing with playing with fiction. Um, it's about manipulating your audience, and I
Mhm,
know I've heard critics say, "Oh, this was a terrible movie because he was manipulating us, or she was manipulating us, or whatever."
mhm,
That only means I think they only mean that it was done in a clumsy,
mhm,
awkward way.
yeah,
But manipulation is a good thing when you take a person who just picks up a book and then like 5 pages later is weeping.
mhm,
You've manipulated them. You've taken them into a world that doesn't really exist and made them cry about it. That's manipulation. And that's
sure, yeah.
gosh, you want to be that's what you want to do as a writer. You
Yeah,
want
that's
to
the
make people
skill you
cry
want,
and laugh
that
and
puppet, yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, and that's totally like that. As a writer, it is your job, whatever genre you're in. If you're in, comedy, your job is to make people laugh and feel. Like you need both. You can't just have no feeling and it's joke, 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 joke. That gets, a little bit boring, right? But like if you're also writing like dramas or a romance, you interplay these different things and these different moments in the story to take. You have to do that to bring the reader along, or else they're not going to care. They're going to be disengaged.
yeah. Well, that's what
And
I was talking about. Engaging your character, engaging your audience is so important. That's manipulation. How can you engage somebody unless you manipulate them because it's not real what you're telling them, so you're manipulating them. So,
I used to have this thing too, like in undergrad, I would bring this up often, which is like, and it seems like in fiction, this is why I like fiction, is that because it's a fantasy, people know it's not real. You're actually given a great opportunity to tell the truth in a way that you can't tell the truth in a nonfiction, because you have to stick to the facts and it has to be
mm,
very well, Richard Nixon never said that, or he never waved his hand like that. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. That's a moot, example, but
Yeah, I
you'd
know
have the,
you bring up Richard Nixon a lot. I've been wondering about that. What?
yeah. Well, I mean, it's because I have a giant poster of him on my wall over there,
Oh yeah,
admiration. So,
right. Yeah,
the constant reminder. So I think that you have an opportunity in fiction to be honest about the human experience in a way that you can't really be honest in real
yeah,
life in a way.
yeah, yeah. It's true because I think that I'm very careful about this. And maybe other people say it's a cop out, but I do not write about myself or my family.
Yeah, I
I
don't
just
either
don't do
actually.
that. I don't want to because it limits what I can or should not say, what I should say or shouldn't or can or can't, because it'll affect them, and I can't take it to the extreme that I maybe want to take it without somebody being hurt.
Mm.
So I don't even name characters after people I know. I keep my life and that fictional world that I create separate. So
Compartmentalized. Yeah.
clearly I draw from my own experiences and my own feelings, but I'm very careful to not ever try and analyze somebody I know in my writing, unless it's it's so well hidden that the person would not know that it's about that person. You
Yeah, I
know.
don't do like revenge writing. I'm not trying to like take out things that happen in my life on characters that, I don't do that kind of thing in my, I actually don't, I draw from my life, but it's more of like attitudes and tones or like a dialect, like a way
Mm,
somebody's speaking or a mannerism or something like that. But, like specific like interactions or arguments I've had or whatever, like I don't
yeah.
really use that too
Mm.
often as like some point to like get revenge in my writing. Some people
I actually
do that.
had a friend of mine who was a writer actually named a character after me, and I really kind of resented it because the
Mm.
character was an idiot.
Right, yeah,
I
yeah.
thought, I know he didn't mean to say I was an idiot, but why did he use my exact name? He used my last name. It was a very uncommon last name,
Hmm.
and then the guy was kind of a dope. And I thought, why do you do that? I just wondered, why do you do that? Why do you pick my name for this dopey character?
Yeah,
I,
somebody used my name, I'd be like, "You're fucking talking about me, man." And they're like, "No, that's the other one." It's like, "No, no, 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 it's not."
I don't know.
I did
I
one time, like, because remember Keith's hands, he used to kind of have a trimmer,
Yeah.
and I had put that into a character that the character had a trimmer, but it wasn't, like, to me, I just found it an interesting part of the character. So it wasn't
Uh,
like a slight or anything, it's just, it had something to do with the character itself. That was the only time where I kind of like drew something because it was a physical thing, like something physical. And so, I,
well, I think it's useful to use those kinds of things as long as you don't name the character Keats and then
yeah,
give him a
no,
tremor.
no, yeah, definitely
But
not.
the actual idea of seeing somebody who you really respect, who's a strong, successful person who has this weakness,
Right. That was
a
basically what
tremor
it
is a
was.
weakness.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thing to use. I draw from real life all the time from my life, but I just make sure that I don't actually confuse the two.
Yeah.
I don't want to, like you said, revenge. There are a lot of people I would love to get revenge on. Well, I wouldn't know, so go that far to say, but there are a lot of people that I have a certain amount of anger or whatever. And I would never try and put them into a story where they're recognizable
Hmm.
to everybody, even though I use a different name, so they know I'm attacking this person.
Hmm.
I don't do that, but some people say that's good writing. I'm not saying it isn't. The head of our department at the school I used to teach for believed that you should write about the things that cause you pain and embarrassment, that have caused you pain and embarrassment in your real life, and be authentic to those moments. And I've had students
I could
during
see
that
that. Like
time.
I've done that in comedy. Like I've written about, I will write about myself sometimes, like things that I know specifically are embarrassing. I'll put that into a character or a situation
Mhm.
because I can fill out the space because I've felt that, that whole and all the different nuances that are around, you know what I mean? I've done that
Yeah,
before,
yeah,
but
yeah.
usually it's self, pointed. I don't, it's not to try to like correct some wrong or, something from somebody else. But yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just saying that this person instructed the writers to go to the point that they actually felt miserable. And I've talked to some of these writers. They hated that. They actually, the process of writing about, for example, somebody who had been raped,
Mm,
and because it was such a traumatic and major event in that person's life, this particular head of the department thought that that person should get to that same pain and feel that pain again in the writing.
mm.
You know, there's some people would say that's great, that's brilliant, and other people, it's like me, I would say, you know, it's better to create those kinds of moments in characters that aren't real than to create something that makes you so miserable that you drink or cry or or get suicidal over it. I don't think that's what writing's about. I think writing's about using your imagination to create these wonderful, interesting characters. But it doesn't mean you should go back because something caused you such great pain that you should write and feel that pain again.
That's a different kind of writing. That's trauma writing, and that could be
Yeah. So,
therapeutic, but that's different than what, we usually
well,
talk
but I'm
about.
saying, so the students that I talk to would say, I hate the class because I hate that I feel so miserable every time I write it. I feel so
Mhm.
terrible. I say, well, don't write it about you. Write those events about somebody else.
Yeah.
But this particular person thought, no, write it about you. You know, you don't have to use your name, but write about you. Write exactly what happened. Relive it. Re-experience the pain. Live the embarrassment and all these terrible things. And I'm saying, I don't know. For me, the writing is kind of pleasant for me. My writing,
Yeah, yeah.
even when I'm writing tragedy, I'm writing about some tragedy that never happened to anybody. Even though I write it so it feels very real, and I'm drawing from things I know and maybe things I've felt and things I know other people have felt. I'm I'm finding myself being able to project it onto a character rather than myself. And so I've never written where I'm feeling that at, while I'm writing, that I just want to go out and jump in front of a train or a bus. And
No.
I've told you, some of my students who had taken these other classes felt that. They said, you know, I just feel so awful and miserable and depressed because I'm taking this class. And I'm saying, well, that's not what writing's supposed to be about. To me,
Yeah.
I don't want to get sick over my writing. I don't think that's appropriate.
No,
But
and I
we,
think that's
I,
an ignorance, and I don't know. I don't know the person, but to me, that seems like a little bit of an ignorance of what the idea of tragedy is in writing. It's not tragic. The tragedy part of writing is you have a hero who, despite all their heroic capabilities, becomes unrealized or meets a fate that is less than ideal that they could, because you recognize all of their attributes, their great
yeah,
attributes. That's a tragedy in the, I don't know, I guess the Greek sense, right? Like a hero that can't, is unrealized, right? Something
uh,
tragic, that's fucking awful. It's just an awful, it's not the same thing. You're not overcoming. There's no resolution, and there's no retribution. It's a totally different kind of thing.
yeah. To me, writing is an escape. And again, some people say, well, it shouldn't be an escape. It should be an engagement of your own life, whatever. I don't think that. To me, writing is an escape. I imagine things, and my imagination takes things that have happened and reassigns them in ways that feel new, that are new.
Yeah.
I don't want to relive my
Otherwise, just keep
pain.
a
And
journal.
right,
You
right. I
know?
don't want to relive the worst moment of my life.
Yeah.
I might have somebody else live through a moment that's that terrible, but I don't want it to be me. I'm a writer, not a therapist or an analyst. It's not what I do. I write. I create entertainment. Bottom
Yeah.
line, I want to entertain people. I don't want to. I don't want to like free myself of these demons of pain and sorrow, and not actually free yourself at all, but force yourself to relive them. I think there are people who think you should feel that stuff, and I think that you should feel when you write, and you should use all the pain and happiness that you felt in your life. But I don't think you should make yourself miserable as a writer. Who wants to live a life as a writer who's miserable all the time? I mean,
Yeah, that's that old, kind of warn. I don't have an association with that trope, but that like the writer that's miserable, hates their life, hates their work, is like self-pitying and and also drinks a lot. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
I don't
I
find
knew a
that
writer
interesting.
who drank a lot,
That seems
and
miserable.
I've known writers who've done drugs, and they're miserable. And well, geez, you choose a profession like writing because you enjoy it. I mean,
I
bottom
mean, you
line
have
for
to spend
me,
so much time doing it. You know what I mean? It's like if you don't
you should
enjoy it,
enjoy it, even when you're
yeah.
writing tragedy, because you're not writing real tragedy, but you want people who read it to get the feeling that it's real for those characters. That's a suspension of disbelief again, not actually recreating something that happened, but recreating things that could have, or creating things that feel real and should be strong and powerful and have depth. But I don't think writing should make you miserable.
No, and
If it does, I don't think
it's like that Hemingway thing too. Like that he's got that famous 6-word story, which is like for sale, baby shoes never worn. You know, so that's a tragic, right? That's a tragedy type of story. But that's because you have to internalize the message that's happening there.
But did that really happen to Hemingway?
Who knows? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to have
Sometimes of those
happened to
things you see
you.
when you're driving around or something like that, you spot something, or like I had one time I knew a couple that was like really, really like trying to have kids. So they had a lot of toys, but they could not conceive. And I just thought like how tragic. They want to conceive so badly that they have toys in their house in case somebody brings a kid over. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Then they ended up conceiving, right? They ended up having a child, conceiving, then having a child. I want to go to chronological order. And then the husband ended up having a brain tumor, like a really
Oh shit.
you know what I mean? So it's like,
But you know what? If that were a story, it would be really engaging, powerful story. If it really happened to you,
mhm.
it's a pain that you don't need to live again.
And it's
Anyhow,
probably
I'm
because
just saying,
I've observed it. You know what I mean? I'm objective to it. I can see the whole, like as a full piece. It's like you can kind of see all the pieces. When you're involved, you can't really. It's not the same thing. You know what I mean? You're so focused on the incremental portions. You don't see the broader strokes of something to say, oh, there's these beginning, middle, and end. And so yeah, being objective and kind of being a fly on the wall gives you an opportunity to see stories in a different way.
so we kind of we've
Yeah, we
digressed
touched on a lot of
from
stuff.
our story about being we're doing about comedy, and we're talking about all this tragedy and tragic moments, but tragedy does lead to comedy, comedy does lead to tragedy, and
Sure.
there's a fine line between pain and pleasure. There's a fine line between laughing and crying,
I'll give an
it,
example.
yeah, go
So
ahead.
Ted Lasso, right? Like one of the main characters, I won't say which, actually a couple of the main characters, they have some tragedy going on with their emotional lives that's leading to comedic moments that we're laughing at, but that's
Hmm.
through a pain that they are suffering, and the behavior exhibited is what is funny, but it's because they're dealing with such difficult emotional trauma, and
Mm.
it's the inability to deal with that emotional trauma in sometimes a mature way and sometimes an immature way, is what, they turn it into entertainment for us. But that's what makes the show good, in my opinion, is that those are real moments they're drawing from. They're attacking it
Mm.
and approaching it in a very interesting, creative, fictionalized way, but also a very truthful way. And it's something that's like, that's where dramedy, I think, kind of has a leg up on some of these Big Bang Theory shows. Now, you can't always feel like you need to be in that moment. If you're going through those moments, maybe Big Bang Theory is
I
something
don't know,
that
sometimes you
you want
just
to
need
watch.
sometimes you need total relief and
Yeah,
release and escape. And Big Bang Theory works great for that. Just
yeah,
go in, don't even care about the story. You just wait for the next joke.
yeah, totally.
And laughter feels good, makes you feel good. So there's nothing really wrong with that. Those are all just different forms of writing. I'm saying there's nothing really wrong with somebody choosing to relive their pain to make a wonderful story if that's their goal in life. To me, my goal in writing is to enjoy the process.
Hmm.
And so if I had to feel miserable all the time and drink and or do drugs to write the entertainment, I wouldn't do it. It's just not what I want to do with my life. I don't want to feel pain with the thing I spend most of my day doing, which is writing.
And if you sit down
I
to
don't
a
want to feel
blank
that.
page every single day, you know what I mean? Or if you finish a project and you're on a new project or a new episode and you know that next new, I don't know how they write like what is that one where it's like it's like SVU? Like I don't know how they deal with that shit.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You know what I
that's
mean?
awful shit.
You know,
I know,
I
I
was like,
know
I
that.
wouldn't want to
I
deal with that.
watch those because they're such God, they're so awful, but
The subject matter
engage.
is so dark. You know,
They
the
can be
set's dark.
engaging, but the whole point is that the special victims unit. So it's really perverse
Yeah, it
things
is
that
very
has to happen
perverse
to make the
to make the show
storyline.
for
And
20 years.
I
Maybe I
know.
drank, maybe I,
And
you know.
some of these reality shows like the Desperate House, the
Real
I mean the
Housewives
Real Housewives of whatever.
of Beverly Hills, Utah, or
I don't know
Salt Lake
when
City, New
I
York,
don't know what part of them is real and what
Atlanta.
part isn't. So I can't watch them and get involved at all because
I
I
love them.
can't.
They're great.
Oh,
They're
do you?
fantastic shows. Yeah, they're
Because I
super good.
can't tell what's real and what isn't real, and
Some
when
of
they're
it's
being
real,
real, when
actually.
they're not being
Some
real.
of it is definitely like what's going on in Beverly Hills right now is real.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're
yeah.
really going through some crazy shit. Yeah, it's
So
interesting.
yes, it's yeah.
But I think yeah, some of
So
it is definitely obviously editorialized for the show so that way they can keep the momentum going, and they probably have
mm,
producers in their ears saying, well, why don't you bring up this so we can talk about this uncomfortable moment and make that a scene at dinner. They seem to just go to dinner and get in arguments. That's the whole premise of the show. Go to an expensive dinner or an expensive vacation and ruin it by getting in these crazy
but the thing
arguments.
is, people don't do that most of the time. Most people
No,
go if they go to an expensive dinner and somebody's like annoying, they can have maybe a little bit of a of some kind of conflict, but most people don't get to that argument where you throw a drink in somebody's face
no, they're like,
and
this
call
bread is so good, I love this bread, and they're like, yeah, the steak came out pretty good, I like it too. So that's
yeah.
not as interesting,
No, it's not interesting. The real dinner wouldn't be nearly as interesting. So they're being fed some of the lines and some of the setups. And I actually know someone, and I won't mention the name again, who actually did do a reality show, who's a celebrity, who did do a reality show. And I know from firsthand that they were told, here's what we're going to do to set you up in this situation so you can bring up this and that, whatever.
yeah,
So it was all fake.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, they were improvising, largely improvising. Some of it not. Some of them they give them a clever line or a
Hmm.
comeback, whatever. So it's all set up to make you
Totally.
get sucked into and get engaged in
They got to
it.
move the show along. Yeah. I don't think Gordon Ramsay yells at every one of his employees like that. I don't think that's real. Not over some creme brulee. If that's the case, I don't know how these people would be chefs. I'd be like, I don't even want to eat your food if you've been screaming over my food like that. I just think that's bad juju. I don't want to eat that, but
Yeah,
it makes
no,
for
it's
good
just
TV.
it does, and that's another form of writing. People write those, so a lot of people don't even think of that. You can get a job as a writer for a reality show. They
Hmm.
do hire writers on reality shows, so that's another thing you can do that people don't think of. How do you make something feel even more real? Because they do have some people going or whatever or and they where they're not articulate or they're not right on point or they're not driving the story forward. They do enough of that so it feels real, but they still put enough fake setups and such so that it's still engaging often enough that you will watch a half hour or an hour of that
Yeah.
without getting bored. So I mean, you ever try and watch somebody really eat dinner at a restaurant for an hour?
Yeah.
That you can do that for about 2 minutes, and you're going to want to walk away.
Yeah, there's a Christopher Nolan movie where it's called The Following, and he follows, it's like one of the main characters follows someone else, and I was like, oh, that'd be cool, it's, and I was talking to this guy I knew, and he's like, yeah, we should meet up and go follow people, and I was like, no, I don't think I'm gonna fucking do that, man. I don't want to follow somebody around town and like, because
Yeah.
people are boring generally in their regular lives, it's
Well, you know what I do? I travel. Well, I don't so much now 'cause I'm not teaching anymore, but I used to teach in San Francisco and I live in LA. So I used to travel every week, twice up and back. And I was in the airports and I'd listen to what people are talking about.
yeah.
And you listen to these people and they're just talking about their food or whatever. And then these people are having an argument. That's the one you watch.
Oh, I love street
Isn't it?
arguments, couple
Isn't that the
street
one
arguments
yeah,
all the
you
time.
watch that one. You watch the argument, or you watch some bizarre thing that they're saying something terribly stupid or wrong. But the ones who are just doing the normal thing, buying a Starbucks coffee and saying, "Oh, it's too hot," or I should have gotten the oat milk instead of the whole milk, or I should have got, and that stuff just bores you, and you're gone. So if you're in an airport and you're really watching people to entertain yourself,
Yeah.
you're always sucked into the ones who are doing something intense, and intensity sometimes is usually it's kind of arguments.
We're
Usually
drawn
it's
to conflict. I don't know what it is.
yeah,
We like to think we like need this banal moments all the time, and that's we want to live in this prosperity, moments of prosperity and no strife and peaceful moments. But I don't think that's really. I think we like the strife. We like the. I know people that like wake up and look at the news. That's the first thing they do when they look at. They get
yeah.
up and look at the news. And sometimes the news is relevant to you specifically, but a lot of times it's out there in the world somewhere. But that energy that you get, that intensity of like, oh shit, can you believe this is going on in whatever country I've never been to and I don't know anybody from there? It gets people worked up. I think we
You
get
know,
addicted to being worked up.
we do, and so watch news, and you'll see almost all of it's bad news.
Yeah,
Almost all of it, almost virtually the whole thing is bad news.
totally.
And so we thrive on that. We're just listening to one
We're
bad
hungry
news
for
after
it.
another.
And then we're
And
like, if it's not in that news, we want to watch a show that has some terrible conflict, or you want to hear
and,
some rumors or something, like.
they say that the epitome of that is that when you drive by an accident on the freeway, you don't want to see anybody. You don't want anybody to have died, but you cannot help look. I mean, I drove by the other day and a car was flipped over, and I'm looking back. I'm thinking, drive, focus ahead, but somehow you're drawn to those things. We're
Oh
drawn
yeah,
to that
super
stuff.
curious.
It's like you're curious. I don't
Yeah,
know.
we're
That's what I say.
complex.
I think what the main takeaway from what we're talking about is that storytelling is complex. There's so many ways to do it, in so many different forms. You have to have a sense of what is good storytelling, and you can't follow rules and dogmatic teaching about how to write a good script, whether it's comedy or drama or tragedy or horror or whatever. Some people write them great. Stephen King can write horror about something fairly simple in a way that other people could have a horrific thing and not tell it very well and lose your attention after you've just found out what happened and you're on.
Yeah,
You
M. Night
you
Shyamalan
passed
has
it.
a career. I mean, if you could believe that. I don't know, man. I can't stand some of that shit anyways. But he did make Sixth Sense. I thought that was a great movie.
Sixth Sense was I think his best movie. Yeah, yeah,
Unbreakable was unfucking watchable. I don't know. Some of these movies he makes, like what is that? The wood or he made The Village. God, that
yeah,
was an
yeah.
awful movie. Holy shit, that was awful. I couldn't fucking believe they were like, oh,
But
this
it
is
had
this is the
if
thing we
people.
don't talk about. I was like, the movie is the thing we should not talk about. That fucking movie was awful.
But isn't it interesting how you can take a horrific thing and still not really get scared or
Oh yeah.
engaged.
And
It's
then you take
just
The
like
Exorcist.
boring. Yeah,
Fuck.
and then you take something else and it just scares the shit out of you. I can't tell you. I mean, has anybody ever written the book that tells you exactly how to be a good writer? No. I've read a lot of books and there's a lot of theories and some are very very specific and very exact and very dogmatic, and some are very vague. And I don't know
You know,
how
that's
to.
interesting too, because we get craft questions. You know, people want to know about the actual crafting of stuff. So, you know, and I know we got to wrap up soon, but let me ask you this, just as in terms of craft, do you,
Mhm.
you know, one of the things that you hear, and I've had producers tell me this, and as a writer, I'm like, I don't need that information until I need the information. So I'm not going to waste my time doing that. And that question
Mhm.
is, do you do character bios, and how in depth are your character bios,
Yeah, that's a good
if
question,
you
because
do?
I have known instructors at university level who think you should know everything. You should know what their favorite color is, how they would react to somebody a slap in the face. How would that person react? And none of that. I don't know. It just, what's their favorite dessert, and that kind of stuff to me is too much wasted time. I
Exactly.
don't want
That
all
I have
that
to
stuff.
agree
I don't want all
100%.
that.
To me, it's like I don't know. I don't need to know that stuff until it comes up in the story. You know what I mean? If it's relevant to a scene or the story, then I'll use it. But
Mm,
to me, it seems like, and you know, correct me if you, you know, if you agree or disagree. Let me know. I think it's procrastination from writing a story. If I do a character bio, now I have to do a bio for their parents and their grandparents and their great
yeah,
grandparents. You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
I'm going back through history and it's not relevant, you know, unless it's
And,
relevant to
and,
the
and
story.
those people who believe in those kinds of background stories, they will say that knowing something about a character very specific will sometimes help you generate where that character is going to go.
I think the dialogue, the action, the behaviors, the story elements, what's happening, that's what dictate, and the character, what the characters, I ultimately think what the character needs from the story and what they want, that's what dictates where the character goes, how they handle adversity, how they handle, um, you know, getting what they want, not getting what they want. You know, that's where you learn, oh, that's because this, he didn't get the home run and junior high and all the kids made fun of him. That's why he's so,
Yeah,
you know, needs it so badly now. You know what I mean? To prove to himself that he's worth a damn or something. That's where you learn.
right.
To me, that's where you learn those things. I have a hard time. To me, it just seems like a waste. I'm trying to do. You know, earlier on, I tried to do those bios, and I was like, this. I'll go. I'll be going forever. I'll be writing a bio about everybody on the planet.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it's procrastination to a large extent. And I think that knowing your characters really well before you start writing them is important. Having to know if they had a pet that died when they were very young is not important unless there's something that relates to that in your story.
Yeah,
So
it needs to be on the page.
yeah, so I don't know. I always want to know some things about my characters. I always write a bio. I just don't write the extensive bio. I've seen bio questions that are. I saw one that one of the instructors gave me from one of my classes. It was about, it must have been about 20 pages long of questions about the character. And it just got to the point that after you fill them out about all your characters, you start getting confused about who's who and what, who did what. You got to get into your characters and what's happening, and that will dictate. Sometimes it'll change your character. You might have a character who has a certain feeling, and then you get to the scene and, oh man, it'd be better if this character really came into the scene with this
Hmm.
feeling.
Yeah.
So then somebody say, well, isn't it too late? No, then you go back. You're writing. This isn't
Hmm.
life where it
Hmm.
already happened. Go back and change the earlier
Yeah, you plug those
scene
little moments
to
up.
make it
Yeah,
consistent
totally.
to this point you want to get to now, as opposed to having already written the bio. So he has to, or she has to respond that way, when you really would have been more interested if she responded that way and you go back and change the bio.
You know what I think
So
it does? You know what I think it does too is it sets people up for a concrete world. You're not doing discovery. I like the discovery part of writing. I like to learn about the characters and the
I
moments.
agree.
And
That's
if
part of
you
the
have that,
fun.
yeah, that's where you get the tingles on your arms and you're like, "Oh, this I can't believe this character's going this way." You know, like you're learning as the almost as the
Yeah.
audience is. But if you have committed yourself to 20 pages of what this person had for breakfast when they were 15 years old, you know what I mean? Then you're stuck. You don't feel like you, because the more you write about something, the more you feel like you're stuck. It does become more difficult to change things as you get further along, and you have to be flexible in that way. And if you come at it that way, and my experience, it does limit you, because you're like, the character wouldn't do this because they had oatmeal for breakfast for 3 years. When it's like, no, 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 you can change all that shit.
You
If
know what
it's not on the
happens?
page, it doesn't matter.
I think that stuff will allow you to write more quickly. To have a very, very uh, extensive bio will help you write more quickly because you know exactly how the character's going to go, and you just stay on track. But I agree with you. I love the discovery. That's the
Yeah,
fun. What we were talking about earlier, where I said I don't want to write about my own specific pain that's very real and true only to me,
right,
because
that's a
I'll
good
get
point.
lost up in that stuff.
Right.
Part of the I think writing should be fun. I'm sorry, but if people disagree with me, writing is not
And you
a
already know
pen.
it. You already know that pain, right? So it's not
Yeah.
anything new to you. You know what I mean? It's like you already know the ending of that. Yeah, I agree. I think that's a
So
good point.
so and I think that in the same way that when you write, it should be entertaining. The bottom line is what I'm writing entertaining? Not is it funny enough? Not is it tragic enough? Is it going to entertain my audience? Is my audience going to watch it and feel good about being entertained? That's where I come from. And so I also say that about me. Am I going to enjoy the process? Because if I don't want to spend my whole life involved in this thing. It's imaginary anyhow. What's the point of it unless it gave you some pleasure or some fun, or otherwise just get a regular job and struggle like everybody else at a job maybe you don't like because it makes you money. um
If you want struggle, just get into the business. I mean, that's going to give you plenty of struggle. It's
yeah.
that's going to be plenty of tragedy and trauma. Like if you're going to spend 360 degrees just being miserable, I don't know why you'd even do that. You got to give yourself a little bit of relief.
No, it's like, yeah, life is hard. So part of even when you write a tragedy that's hard, part of the fun of it is it's not real. It's not what happened to you, and you just want everybody to experience what happened to you. You're creating something from scratch. You invented it. You built something.
Yeah.
You built something that wasn't there is there now because you built it. You
Yeah.
made it.
Yeah, totally.
I would feel the same kind of pleasure. I think if I were a carpenter
Hmm.
or woodwork or something. My brother builds things with wood all the time, and he loves it. He creates things from nothing. Well, from
Hmm.
wood, but I mean, there's thing. We create things from words that were just a bunch of words scrambled around, and suddenly there's a story that is a thing. It's real. It
Hmm.
entertains people. Where the words, random words, don't entertain people, but you put them in an order that makes it entertaining. That's like putting a great puzzle together. We're in a big jigsaw puzzle, and you finally finish. What's the point of that? But there's some satisfaction in that too,
Hmm.
in putting something together. And then, wow, look at this great picture from all these little pieces I had.
Hmm.
That's still not as creative as if you painted it yourself.
Yeah.
If you just had a bunch of uh, pieces of tile and broken up pieces of tile, and you make a mosaic of but that's what I feel. We should enjoy the process of
I
creating
agree.
something. Create something from nothing. Go in there with all you have is words, and you come out with something that moves somebody.
Yeah, I agree. And that's, you're on the adventure first. You're the one you're going to get the laughs, you're going to get the highs and the lows. You're on that adventure first. You're the main audience in the very beginning. So,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know. Again, I just
Because
think
I know people have
you
told
got to
me
enjoy it.
I've actually had a producer say to me he wanted me to write this thing that he knew would be a big hit, make us both a lot of money because it was so obscene and disgusting and awful.
Mhm.
And I turned it down. I said, look, I don't want to do that. That's not what I do. Yes, that will make money. Yes, that will engage your audience. But that's not what I want to do. I want to create this thing when it's done. Maybe it'll make people feel sad or
Mhm.
maybe make them feel happy. But I want to do that thing. I don't want to just throw out stuff there that I know will be money making.
Yeah.
That'll just make me money because people want to see it. I think some horror films are just about making people just about making money, but some people Not all horror films, obviously. A lot, most horror films are still, it's a genre I don't get myself personally. I don't enjoy. But to somebody who enjoys horror, if they can create, again, all these random words and put them together into something that scares the shit out of somebody,
Mhm.
that's a big success.
Yeah, and I mean, they serve a purpose, and so does money. I mean, let's be real. I mean, the more if you have money, it buys you some time to work on some things that you really care about. So it's not all, I totally understand where you're coming from though. Like, it is one of those things like where there is like you kind of feel like you have a thing that you do, and to just get paid to do something that's not really part of your character feels like you're compromising a piece of yourself just to
If
make
you
money.
don't like the thing that's done, if you do something and at the end you don't like it, but it makes a lot of money, it doesn't feel satisfying. I have done rewrites on other people's work where, um, where it's not necessarily satisfying. I'm more satisfied when I write my own thing and I do it from scratch. And as I said, you have all these words. You have a dictionary full of words. Every great, every great story that's ever been written is in the dictionary in all those words there, but they're all random. It's your job of putting them together in a way that makes people want to keep looking at it, reading it, following it, getting involved in it, reacting to it. I enjoy that. And if it's just about grossing someone out, just making somebody disgusted, because I don't want to get them there. That's not where I'm going. But yeah, if somebody said, look, if you do this thing and it grosses everybody out and make everybody disgusted and it'll make you $100 million, I'd probably say, all right. When when do you need it?
Yeah.
What's my deadline?
Yeah.
But because money's a factor. I know money's a factor,
Yeah.
but
But I know what you mean. There's an integrity to the work. And if you're somebody who, takes the work seriously and you're interested in, that exploratory portion of yourself that's creating something from nothing, and, you're, because it's a discovery about yourself too. You're learning about yourself along the way. And that's more rewarding ultimately, is to do that part of it.
yeah, I was in a creative writing class where I wrote a story about a sexual encounter that I had when I was in college. And the weirdest thing happened was that I wrote this, and then it was supposed to be just, I turned it into the professor. He liked it a lot. And then he said, okay, what I want you to do is pick the person next to you on your left. Because he wanted to be random, on your left or right, or whatever he said it was, and give them your script to read. And it was supposed to be something that he said was supposed to be something true, and that was only he would read. But now he wants somebody else to read. The weird thing, this is like incredibly weird, but the woman sitting next to me was the woman the story was about.
Oh, no way.
I didn't want to give it to her.
Yeah.
Oh shit! Because I said a lot of bad things about her.
Hmm.
I didn't want her to read it. I didn't know what to do. This really happened to me in a class,
Yeah.
and she read it. I gave it to her, and she read it. And I'm sitting there going, "Oh man, this is so awful." And she never commented. I'm not sure if she even realized it was about her. Because I didn't use her name. Um, I don't know if she knew it was about her, or else she did. And she was so hurt she didn't want to show it. But whatever. That's not what writing is supposed to be about to me. It's not about embarrassing people or hurting people or making it weird. I mean, why this guy tell us we're going to write something that he's going to read, and now I want to give it to a stranger? But he didn't know the stranger was not going to be a stranger sitting next to me. But cut this part out. I don't want to talk about cut this out. I don't know what I'm talking about. So never mind. You ready to call this
Yeah,
a
we gotta
night?
call it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's going a little bit
Let's
long.
call it. Yeah, I got a little bit off track there,
It's all good.
but it did happen to me. It was just the weirdest thing, and I was so embarrassed by it. Yeah, it was really embarrassing because I was totally honest about a situation that wasn't so good for her. It wasn't so good for me either. But and then she read it, and I went, "Oh shit! What are the odds that that's going to happen?" So that's one of the downsides about writing about your own life.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like have the freedom to be able to write, make it all up, That's the fun. That's the fun way to write.
yeah.
So
So,
anyhow, go feed your chickens.
all right.
I gotta walk my dog,
Yeah.
and we'll call it a night. Who gonna wish happy birthday to?
I don't know. We haven't wished any scumbags a happy birthday for a while.
Just happy birthday, scumbags.
Yeah. Yeah. Why
You know
not?
who you are. Happy
Yeah.
birthday to you. Happy birthday to you guys
Yeah.
or
All right.
gals.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to discriminate. So, all right. Well, good stuff. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon, and then we'll go over some of that other stuff. And other than that, I think that's the show for today.
That's the show for the day.
Ciao.